we work very closely with them as the government, and we're providing funding and also helping them provide training to their staff so that women can feel safe at night. And it is vital that the funding that we're providing is being used by local authorities, for example, to provide testing kits, provide taxi marshals to get women home safely at night. Police are also ramping up their forensic capabilities. There's a lot of work going on.
Jenkins.
Question number 8, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's proposals will protect freedom of speech. The proposals will not affect a parent's right to express their views and raise their children with their values. Parents, clinicians and teachers will of course continue to be able to have open and challenging conversations with young people or others about their sexual orientation or whether they are transgender or not.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that answer. There have been instances of parents being reported to social services for not simply affirming their child's new trans identity. Can my honourable friend assure parents that their right to not simply affirm their child's new identity will be protected in the face of the ideological capture of some of our public services?
Minister.
Thank you. Parents and carers will of course have the right to express their views on how a child identifies.
To Topicals, Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, we're 5 months away from Safe to Be Me, the UK's first ever global LGBT rights conference. Everybody should be free to be themselves, but that is not true in too many parts of the world. We will work with friends and allies across the globe to turn the tide on authoritarianism, spread freedom, and end the criminalisation, persecution and violence experienced by far too many LGBT people.
Mr. Speaker, Aylesbury has a sizable Pakistani diaspora, and we've seen excellent campaigns locally and nationally to encourage uptake of vaccines amongst this community. However, in the town's central wards, fewer than half of the people have had the booster so far. So what steps is my honourable friend taking to work across government to encourage vaccine take-up for ethnic minority groups, especially those who don't have English as their first language?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my department has been working across government to promote vaccine uptake among ethnic minorities. We've worked with trusted local voices, such as faith leaders, to spread messaging and publish key information and advice via community TV and radio stations, translated into a range of different languages, including Urdu and Punjabi. I also met the High Commissioner for Pakistan in May to consider other ways we can reach out to diaspora groups to promote vaccine confidence and uptake. And I should say, Mr. Speaker, between April and October 2021, the largest increase in vaccine uptake in over 50s was amongst the Pakistani and Black African ethnic groups.
The Minister, Tawawatami.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Department for Work and Pensions data show that 4 in 5 black people have less than 1,500 in the bank. More worryingly, approximately 1 in 4 black British Bangladeshi and British Pakistani people have no savings at all. Energy bills are going up. Food prices are up, taxes are up. The cost of living will hit minority communities hardest. So what action will the Minister take to ensure that minority communities are not pushed into greater hardship this winter?
Mr. Speaker, we have put £1,000 more per year on average into the pockets of the lowest earners through changes to universal credit, increasing the minimum wage next April to £9.50 per hour and helping with the cost of fuel bills. Our multi-billion pound plan for jobs, which has recently been expanded by 500 million, will help people across the UK to find work and to boost their wages and prospects, and this will disproportionately benefit those from minority-led communities.
In May 2020, Professor Sarah Gilbert, with help from the Downing Street team, was working on the AstraZeneca vaccine. What more can my right honourable friend do to encourage more women in biomedicine?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right about the achievements of Sarah Gilbert, and she was part of our Gender Equality Advisory Council working across the G7 to give those opportunities to more women and enable more of that entrepreneurship and ideas and innovation around the world.
Does the Secretary of State share my concern that many older workers who lose their jobs find it difficult to get back into work, either because of employer prejudice or an artificial requirement for paper qualifications with no allowance made for capability or experience. And what's she going to do about it?
Well, the Department for Work and Pensions have launched the 50-plus choices, which specifically addresses the issue that the honourable gentleman raises, and I'll get the Minister, in respect of that matter, to write to my honourable friend.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Outcomes for people in Blackpool with regards to education, health and employment are among the worst in the entire country. I welcome the Equality Data Programme, which is examining how factors such as social background and geography can contribute towards inequality. How does the Minister expect this programme to reduce those inherent inequalities which have disadvantaged people in Blackpool for decades?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Often where you live has a bigger impact on your outcomes than anything else. For example, the wage gap between London and the North West is £5.22 on average an hour. We are examining the drivers between these disparities, and we've appointed Catherine Birbalsingh to lead the Social Mobility Commission to help propose the policies that are going to sort this out.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As the co-chair of the APPG for BAME businesses, I've been working closely with the Special Advisor, Diana Crouch, to identify and address the barriers that BAME entrepreneurs experience in accessing finance. A significant issue is the lack of data collected by banks and other institutions on the ethnicity of business owners. Will the Secretary of State meet with me and the APPG to discuss how better collection of business owners' ethnicity data can be driven forwards across government?
Minister.
I'd be very keen to hear what the APPG thinks are the solutions to this issue. She will know that collecting ethnicity data is a sensitive issue and it's not something that all people want to do, but I'm very happy to work with her and the APPG to find out more about how we can come to some resolution on it.
Sim Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that by increasing diversity in the STEM sector, it's not only good for the individual who will benefit from well-paid, creative, rewarding jobs, but it brings a wealth of talent and creativity to an ever more important sector itself?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. We need all of the talent in Britain on the pitch, which is why it's so important we get more people into STEM, particularly girls and women.
We now going to start PMQs, but before we do, I want to remind everybody the Prime Minister's question. I would like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We now start with Prime Minister's questions. Dr. James Davies.
Question number one, Mr. Speaker. Well, sir.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know that the whole House will want to join me in paying tribute to Jack Dromey. His working life was devoted to his trade union members and, in recent years, his constituents in Birmingham and Erdington. I was deeply saddened to hear of his death, and my thoughts are with Harriet and the family and all those who knew him as a friend. Mr. Speaker, I want to apologise. I know that millions of people across this country have made extraordinary sacrifices over the last 18 months. I know the anguish that they have been through, unable to mourn their relatives, unable to live their lives as they want or to do the things they love. And I know the rage they feel with me and with the government I lead when they think that in Downing Street itself the rules are not being properly followed by the people who make the rules. And though I cannot anticipate the conclusions of the current inquiry, I have learned enough to know that there were things we simply did not get right. And I must take responsibility. Number 10 is a big department with the garden as an extension of the office, which has been in constant use because of the role of fresh air in stopping the virus. And when I went into that garden just after 6 on the 20th of May 2020, to thank groups of staff before going back into my office 25 minutes later to continue working, I believed implicitly that this was a work event. But Mr. Speaker, with hindsight, I should have sent everyone back inside. I should have found some other way to thank them, and I should have recognised that even if it could be said technically to fall within the guidance, there would be millions and millions of people who simply would not see it that way, people who suffered terribly, people who were forbidden from meeting loved ones at all, inside or outside. And to them and to this House, I offer my heartfelt apologies. And all I ask is that Sue Gray be allowed to complete her inquiry into that day and several others so that the full facts can be established. And I will, of course, come back to this House and make a statement. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Dr. James Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Carol Ridgway faces 8 weeks of stress and worry as she waits for an urgent appointment at the local breast clinic in North Wales. Yet, despite the pandemic, 85% of patients in England wait only 2 weeks for their urgent suspected cancer referrals. What can my right honourable friend do to ensure equality of healthcare across Britain?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. I'm sorry about the case that he raises. Of course, health is a devolved matter, but I thank our NHS colleagues across the whole of the UK, and I point out that the Welsh Government will benefit from an additional 3.8 billion of funding this year, plus a further 270 million to support the response to COVID, Mr. Speaker.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I join with the comments about Jack Dromey? We will, I think, be doing tributes in due course in relation to Jack. Well, there we have it. After months of deceit and deception, the pathetic spectacle of a man who's run out of road. His defence that he didn't realise he was at a party. It is so ridiculous that it's actually offensive to the British public. He's finally been forced to admit what everyone knew, that when the whole country was locked down, he was hosting boozy parties in Downing Street. Yes. Is he now going to do the decent thing and resign?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is...
Hancock went.
I think somebody will be going for an early cup of tea as well. Can I just say, the question's been asked. I want to know the answer. Your constituents want to know the answer. I don't need any extra help either. So please, Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the point that he's making about the event that I attended. I want to repeat that I thought it was a work event, and Mr. Speaker, I regret very much that we did not do things differently that evening. And Mr. Speaker, as I've said, and I take responsibility and I apologise, Mr. Speaker. But as for his political point, I don't think that he should preempt the outcome of the inquiry, and he will have a further opportunity, Mr. Speaker, I hope, to question me as soon as possible.
Keir Starmer.
Well, that apology was pretty worthless, wasn't it? Let me tell him why this matters. Yesterday, in this chamber, honourable members told heart-wrenching stories about the sacrifices people across the country were making. This House and the whole country were moved by the honourable member for Strangford as he talked about his mother-in-law dying alone. He was following the rules, whilst the Prime Minister was partying in Downing Street. Is the Prime Minister really so contemptuous of the British public that he thinks he can just ride this out?
Mr. Speaker, I heard the testimony of the honourable member opposite, and I echo his his sentiments. It was deeply moving. Nobody who heard that could fail to have been moved. And I know that people up and down the country made huge sacrifices throughout this pandemic, Mr. Speaker, and I understand the anger, the rage that they feel at the thought that that people in Downing Street were not following those rules. I regret the way the event I have described was handled. I bitterly regret it and wish that we could have done things differently. And I have and will continue to apologise for what we did. But, Mr. Speaker, he must wait for the inquiry, which will report as soon as possible.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister's former Health Secretary broke the rules, he resigned.
Yes.
And the Prime Minister said he was right to do so. When the Prime Minister's spokesperson laughed about the rules being broken, she resigned.
Yeah.
And the Prime Minister accepted that resignation. Why does the Prime Minister still think that the rules don't apply to him?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's not what I've said, and I understand the point that he makes. As I've said, Mr. Speaker, I regret the way things happened on the evening in question, and I apologise. But if I may say to him, I do think it would be better if he waited until the full conclusion of the inquiry, until the full facts are brought before this House, Mr. Speaker, and he will then have an opportunity to put his points again.
Keir Starmer.
This just isn't working, Prime Minister. No. Everyone could see what happened.
Exactly.
It started with reports of boozy parties in Downing Street during lockdown. The Prime Minister pretended that he had been assured there were no parties.
Yeah.
How that fits with his defence out, I do not know.
Exactly.
Then the video landed, blowing the Prime Minister's first defence out of the water. So then he pretended he was sickened and furious about the parties. Now it turns out he was at the parties all along. Can't the Prime Minister see why the British public think he's lying through his teeth?
Prime Minister, it was what the public think, not what a member is saying. That's order. And I certainly don't need any help from round here. If somebody wants to help me, they can help somewhere else. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's up to the right honourable gentleman to choose how he conducts himself in this place. He's wrong. He's wrong. I say to him that he is wrong. He is wrong in what he has said. He said what he is wrong what he said is wrong in several key respects. But, Mr. Speaker, that does not detract from the basic point that I want to make today, which is that I accept that we should have done things differently on that evening. As I've said to the House, I believe that the events in question were within the guidance and were within the rules, and that was certainly the assumption on which I operated. But can I say to him, Mr. Speaker, that he should wait before he jumps to conclusions, Mr. Speaker. A lawyer should respect the inquiry. I hope that he will wait until the facts are established and brought to this House.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, so we've got the Prime Minister attending Downing Street parties, a clear breach of the rules. We've got the Prime Minister putting forward a series of ridiculous denials which he knows are untrue. Yes. A clear breach of the ministerial code. That code says ministers who knowingly mislead Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation. The party's over, Prime Minister. The only question is, will the British public kick him out? Will his party kick him out, or will he do the decent thing and resign?
Mr. Speaker, I just want to repeat that I think that the right honourable gentleman, I know that it is his objective, and he's paid to try to remove me from office, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that, and I accept that. But may I humbly suggest to him that he should wait until the inquiry has concluded. He should study it for himself, and I will certainly respond as appropriate, and I hope that he does. But in the meantime, yes, Mr. Speaker, I certainly wish that things had happened differently on the evening of May the 20th. Mr. Speaker, and I apologise for all the misjudgments that have been made, for which I take, Mr. Speaker, full responsibility.
Keir Starmer.
The Prime Minister's a man without shame. The public want answers to their questions. Hannah Brady's father, Sean, was just 55 when he lost his life to COVID. He was a fit and healthy key worker. I spoke to Hannah last night, Prime Minister. Her father died just days before the drinks trolley was being wheeled through Downing Street. And last year, Hannah met the Prime Minister in the Downing Street garden. She looked at the Prime Minister in the eye and told him of her loss. The Prime Minister told Hannah he'd done everything he could to protect her dad. Looking back, what Hannah told me last night was this. She realises that the Prime Minister had parted in that same garden the very day her dad's death certificate was signed. What Hannah wants to know is this. Does the Prime Minister understand why it makes her feel sick to think about the way that he's behaved?
Mr. Speaker, I sympathise deeply with Hannah, with people who have suffered up and down this country during the pandemic, and I repeat that I wish things had been done differently on that evening, Mr. Speaker, and I repeat my apology for all the misjudgments that may have been made, that were made on my watch in Number 10 and across government. But I want to reassure the people of this country, including Hannah and her family, that, Mr. Speaker, we have been working to do everything we can to protect her and her family. And it is thanks to the efforts of this government that we have the most tested population in Europe, with 1.25 million tests being conducted every day. We've been working to ensure that this population, our country, has the most antivirals of any country in Europe. And, Mr. Speaker, it's because of the efforts of the government, of officials, of staff up and down Whitehall, that we've driven the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, one of the fastest in the world. And that is the reason, Mr. Speaker, that we now have one of the most open economies, if not the most open economy in Europe, and one of the fastest growing economy, Mr. Speaker, in the G7. And, Mr. Speaker, whatever the mistakes that have been made on my watch, for which I apologise and which I fully acknowledge, that is the work, Mr. Speaker, that has been going on in Number 10 Downing Street.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Education is one of the biggest factors when it comes to levelling up. It's what ensures that people right across the country have access to the same opportunities, and it's a key part of my mission to transform lives in Burnley and Padiham. With that in mind, would the Prime Minister work with me to ensure that Burnley becomes the best place to study, whether you're in primary and secondary school, looking for an apprenticeship in advanced engineering, or undertaking a degree in cybersecurity?
Yes, I thank my honourable friend, and we're investing in education up and down the country, and I'm delighted that Burnley College was part of a successful proposal to become an institute of technology, and that Burnley is home to the growing University of Central Lancashire campus, making it a fantastic place to study in Lancashire.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I add my remarks in terms of Jack Dromey, someone who was a festy fighter for workers' rights and an inspiration to so many of us across this House for the way that he conducted himself. We will miss him, and condolences to Harriet and to the rest of the family. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister stands before us accused of betraying the nation's trust, of treating the public with contempt, of breaking the laws set by his own government. A former member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces, Paul, wrote to me this morning. His father died without the love and support of his full family around him because they followed the regulations, Prime Minister. Paul said, as an ex-soldier, I know how to follow the rules, but the Prime Minister has never followed any rules. He does what he wants, and he gets away with it every time. The Prime Minister can't get away with it again. Will the Prime Minister finally do the decent thing and resign, or will his Tory MPs be forced to show him the door.
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman, but I want to offer my condolences to his constituent who wrote to him, and just to remind him of what I've said earlier. And with the greatest respect to him, I think that he should wait until the inquiry has concluded.
Ian Blackford.
It's an open and shut case. It's an event that should have taken place. It broke the law, Prime Minister. And what's so galling about that response is that the Prime Minister feels no shame for his actions. The public suffered pain and anguish at being kept apart from their families. All the while, the Prime Minister was drinking and laughing behind the walls of his private garden. The public overwhelmingly think that the Prime Minister should resign. Trust has been lost, and the public will not forgive or forget. If the Prime Minister has no sense of shame, then the Tory backbenchers must act to remove him. They know the damage is done. This weak and contentious Prime Minister can no longer limp on. The message from the public is clear. Remove this unfit Prime Minister from office and do it now.
Prime Minister.
Well, I just want to thank the right honourable gentleman for his political advice, which I will take with a pinch of salt since it comes from the Scottish Nationalist Party. But I think that most people looking objectively at what this government has delivered over the last 18 months would agree and I renew my contrition for the mistakes that have been made, but we have delivered the fastest vaccine and the fastest booster rollout in Europe, and the result is that across our whole of our United Kingdom, Mr. Speaker, we have a record number of people back in work.
Simon Fell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, I met with the Chief Executive of my local hospital trust, the University Hospitals of Morecambe Bay, to talk about how they were managing COVID and the impact it was having on them. The impact is stark. They've got about 12 to 15% of their workforce away isolating, and 140 beds, that's about 20% of the total, blocked because they can't get people back out into social care and the community. So with that in mind, will my right honourable friend consider reducing the self-isolation period, if it's seen to be safe to do so, down to 5 days, and also accepting any MACA requests which come through to help get people back out into the community and into social care?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, well, we're certainly looking at reducing the isolation period, and hope to bring you more, Mr. Speaker, about that as fast as possible. We'll certainly look at all MACA requests. But more fundamentally, what we can do to alleviate the pressures in his hospital is to fix the health and social care divide, which is what this government is also doing after a generation of neglect.
Stephen Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's apology is too little, too late. If the Prime Minister was sincere, he could have apologised at any stage over the past 18 months, rather than waiting until he was found out. My constituents in North Down and people across the UK feel betrayed by the Prime Minister. We've had over 150,000 deaths from COVID over the past couple of years. We have seen standards in public life trashed. So for once, can the Prime Minister do the honourable thing and resign for the sake of the public health message and for standards in our democracy?
Mr. Speaker, I can only repeat what I've said, and I understand the feelings he has about the effect of this pandemic on this country, and I certainly grieve for everybody who has died and who has suffered. But on his political point, can I propose that he waits for the inquiry to report?
Susan Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently visited my local job centre, and I'm absolutely pleased to announce that the adult claimant count is down 28%, and the young adult claimant count is down 40%. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking all the hard work of the Stourbridge Job Centre for their dedication to actually achieve these results, and also to contribute to the jobs revival that's happening across the West Midlands? 61,000 new jobs since March 2021.
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I thank her for that. And it's notable that the opposition don't like to dwell on these points, but it is an astonishing fact that we have 420,000 more people in work now than before the pandemic began, and youth unemployment at a record low, Mr. Speaker.
Stephen Bonner.
Mr. Speaker, another week, another scandal for this Prime Minister and his utterly shameless government. For 2 years, my constituents made sacrifice after sacrifice, spending time away from our loved ones, missing out on important life events. Some paid the ultimate sacrifice while he partied away. Figures released just last night show that 79% of people in Scotland think the Prime Minister should step down. Does the Prime Minister now realise that it's clear to all that while he may not understand how to be socially distant from others, there is no doubt that he is morally distant from the rest of us across these nations, and the best thing he can do now is go. Resign, Prime Minister.
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for the SNP, and I repeat the point that I've made earlier on. I don't think that he should preempt or anticipate the inquiry.
John Morrissey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Colne Valley Regional Park runs through my constituency and the Prime Minister's. Would my right honourable friend join me in paying tribute to the volunteers who tirelessly work to preserve this precious green space? And will he work with me to create better protections for this park moving forward?
Prime Minister.
I certainly will. I join her in thanking the wonderful volunteers, and I will do what I can to assist her in protecting this beautiful green space.
Ruth Kepley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a different topic to that of my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, but a related one. Last week at Prime Minister's Questions, the Prime Minister was asked about his previous claim about that his previous claims about inflation were unfounded, and in his reply, he told the House he had said no such thing. But within minutes, the inevitable happened, and people were watching videos on social media saying exactly that. So would the Prime Minister like to take this opportunity to correct the record and apologise for misleading the House on this matter?
That would be inadvertently misleading the House, Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, because I immediately said in my answer to the question that, of course, you had to be concerned about inflation at all times. What I said, I think on TV, was that some of the predictions then about inflation had not proved well-founded. But clearly, inflation is a serious risk. It is going up, and what we need is a strategy to tackle it, and that's what we have.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Grant Bailey, went back to Afghanistan in September. He disappeared in December around Christmas time. We think the Taliban have him. Can my right honourable friend advise me and his family whether he knows anything about this man, who has him, and what is being done to get him home?
Prime Minister. I thank my honourable friend and for raising the case with me, and I hope I will organise a meeting for him with the relevant minister as soon as possible to establish what we can do to help Grant.
Bill Turner.
He's not apologised, Mr. Speaker, for breaking the rules and breaking the law. He's sorry because he's been caught. He is bang to rights. So when my constituents were making unimaginable decisions, he was hosting a boozy party in Downing Street. So how does he think he can still maintain the one rule for him and another for the rest of us? He cannot, and he must resign.
Mr. Speaker, I refer to the answer I gave earlier on.
Peter Byrne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This Friday, my private member's bill, BBC licence fee abolition, gets its second reading. It will abolish the BBC licence fee and require the BBC to be funded by subscription. In this day and age, it's ridiculous to have a state broadcaster. It's ridiculous that people are forced to pay a fee just because they have a television. And what is totally wrong, that people who believe the BBC to be institutionally biased have to subsidise them. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister, if he's free on Friday, come along and support the bill?
Mr. Speaker, I have the highest respect for the media judgment of my honourable friend, and though I understand some of his strictures about the BBC, Mr. Speaker, I would also say that it is a great national institution. But I will study what he has to say with interest.
Toby Perkins. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've all had Prime Ministers that we disagreed with or we didn't rate, but there's never been one that debased the office in the way that this. He's now forced to lie down in the back of his car to keep away from photographers. We all know the Prime Minister was sacked from 2 previous jobs for lying. So can he explain to the House why he believes that the great office of Prime Minister can be held to a lower standard than those previous jobs that he was sacked from?
Prime Minister. Well, I welcome the point that the honourable gentleman makes. In the partisan spirit with which I think it was intended, I don't agree with him. But can I suggest to him respectfully that he waits until the inquiry is concluded, which I hope will be as soon as possible.
Alberto Costa.
Washing machine manufacturers are considering installing microfiber filter systems in all new washing machines. Will the Prime Minister ask his ministers? Will the Prime Minister ask his ministers to look at?
We've got a slight problem. Some of you want to catch my eye. The longer this question takes, the less other people will get in. Alberto Costa.
People laughing at plastic pollution, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister ask his ministers to look into the viability of my bill, which has cross-party support and seeks to introduce inexpensive microplastic filters on all new washing machines?
Well, I want to thank my honourable friend for his campaign. And I believe that we should tackle microplastic pollution, Mr. Speaker. And I'm glad that DEFRA are looking at the introduction of legislation for microfiber filters on washing machines as a cost-beneficial solution. And I will make sure that my right honourable friend, Secretary of State for the Environment, will keep him informed of how we're doing.
Mr. Brenda Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too wish to join colleagues in paying tribute to Jack Dromey. I knew him first in the early 70s and worked with him on the Grunwick strike. He will be greatly missed. Mr. Speaker, thousands of men and women in Afghanistan supported the NATO mission, and they have been abandoned. In 6 months, we don't have a credible route to help people out of Afghanistan safely. The most recent update from the FCDO is directly contradicted by the UN. While the FCDO claims that from spring the UNHCR will make referrals to evacuation schemes, the UNHCR's own website is very clear they make no such referrals. Mr. Speaker, is the government creating a Kafkaesque system to intentionally fail those we owe something to, or is this yet another case of the amateurism and hopelessness that prioritized pen farthings pets over human beings?
Mr. Speaker, I believe he does a serious injustice to the efforts of local councils up and down the country to look after people coming from Afghanistan, and I think he does an injustice to the efforts of the UK. We are proud already under Operation Pitting to have evacuated 15,000 people from Afghanistan, Mr. Speaker, and we've allocated 286 million in aid, in assistance for people in Afghanistan, and we are continuing to offer safe passage to this country from Afghanistan.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware that Eastleigh was formed as a railway town. From producing locomotives and carriages to building gliders for the D-Day landings, Eastleigh has a proud railway heritage.
Hear, hear.
Given this pedigree, the excellent transport links and the need to level up the south, does he agree with me that Eastleigh would make the perfect home for the new headquarters of Great British Railways?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is a great champion for Eastleigh, and as I told the House earlier, further details of the competition to identify the new Great British Railways headquarters will be announced in the coming weeks.
Mr. Speaker, in my constituency of Stockport, the average rent for a two-bedroom property is an unaffordable £800, and recently, in the last 13 years, the rents have been significantly increasing. One constituent contacted me recently to explain that she and her husband, who are in their 70s and suffer from ill health, have just been served with a Section 21 notice after living in the property for almost 20 years. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's own manifesto promised a better deal for renters, which included abolishing no-fault evictions. So when will he scrap this practice and reintroduce the much-needed Renters Reform Bill, which seems to have been kicked into the long grass?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, one of the first things I did when I became Prime Minister was to uprate local housing allowance so that people on social rent would be able to afford where they live more easily, is a key component of tackling the cost of living, Mr. Speaker. But what we're also doing is building record numbers of homes, Mr. Speaker, and I was very pleased to see a huge increase in the number of people able to get the homes that they need. But the point that he makes about renters is also very, very important. And that's why we're tackling the rights of renters as well.
Jack Brereton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 56 million through the Levelling Up Fund, 40 million through Transforming Cities. This is just some of the investment we've secured for Stoke-on-Trent recently. Would my right honourable friend agree, after decades of neglect, this Conservative Party is the only party that is levelling up opportunities in Stoke-on-Trent?
Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend. He is a fantastic champion for Stoke-on-Trent, and in addition to all the things that we are supporting in Stoke-on-Trent, I'm delighted to say that Stoke-on-Trent will become the home to the Home Office as well.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think this session shows how much of a distraction the Prime Minister's behaviour has been. I want to ask him that after a recent survey showed 37% of small businesses felt totally unprepared for the introduction of import controls, rules of origin and the upcoming SPS checks. So will he listen to the FSB and introduce financial and technical support to those small businesses, or is he just too busy drinking in his garden?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank her, but what we are doing is offering financial and technical support to businesses, and they are responding magnificently. And as we come out of the pandemic, we are seeing, as I said to the House earlier on, record numbers of people in work and youth unemployment at a record low.
Alicia Cairns.
Speaker, the motto of England's smallest county, Rutland, is multum in parvo, much in little, and never has that been more true than the last 2 weeks. The greatest Roman discovery in 200 years, an ichthyosaur, the greatest fossil discovery in 100 years. So will he please support us to build a new tourism industry and 2 heritage museums in Rutland to preserve these amazing discoveries in our county?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm agog. I'm longing to come and see these extraordinary additions to the cultural heritage of Rutland, and I thank her for drawing it to my attention, and I look forward to making a visit as soon as I can.
Daniel Zeitner.
Mr. Speaker, the government's flagship Green Homes grant scheme collapsed in a £1.5 billion shambles at the end of last year, with just 81 vouchers issued in Cambridge and just 85 in the Prime Minister's constituency. With energy bills about to go through the roof, what is it about this government that makes it so peculiarly unable to run a basic loft-lagging scheme?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are supporting measures to retrofit homes up and down the country, and in addition, in order to improve the insulation, Mr. Speaker. But what we're also doing is supporting people with the costs of their fuel. We will continue to do that through the Warm Homes discount, the winter fuel allowance, and all the other payments that we make.
On Welsh free ports, can the Prime Minister confirm to me and my Ynys constituents that the UK government is committed to at least one free port in Wales, and can he give an update to the House as to how discussions are progressing with the Welsh government?
Yes. Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend. I can tell her that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, is indeed talking to his counterparts in the Welsh government about establishing a free port in Wales, and I urge our friends in the Welsh government to agree those plans as a matter of urgency.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. The government commissioned NatSen to research the use of health and disability benefits, but has yet to publish the findings. Its own protocol for publication states social research must be released in a way that promotes public trust. The cost of living crisis is hitting disabled people hard at a time when many people were already struggling, and it's surely time to start rebuilding their trust. So will the Prime Minister commit today to publishing this research?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will do everything we can to support people throughout the recovery period from the pandemic. We will support disabled people, and we continue to increase our support for families up and down the country. And she requests that we publish the research. We will do so as soon as we can, Mr. Speaker.
Jenkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank my right honourable friend for his continued support for new nuclear.
Hear, hear.
Following the passing of our landmark nuclear financing bill this week, will he put his weight behind my efforts and those of my Cumbrian colleagues to bring large and small new nuclear to Cumbria?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and he is quite right that one of the disasters of the Labour administration of the 13 years of Labour was that they allowed a total collapse in our nuclear power, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid, which is one of the reasons we have a shortage of energy, and that's why we're investing now in small modular reactors as well as the big projects.
Chris Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the Prime Minister didn't spot that he was at a social event. That's the excuse, isn't it? Come off it. I mean, how stupid does the Prime Minister think the British people are? The worst of it is, he's already managed to completely destroy Allegra Stratton's career. He's tarnished the reputation of Lord Geit. And now he's making fools of every single MP who cheered him earlier. Every single one who goes out on the radio and television to defend this shower of shenanigans. Would it not be absolutely despicable if, in the search for a scapegoat, some junior member of staff ends up losing their job, but he kept his?
I'm grateful as ever, Mr. Speaker, to the right honourable gentleman. I think a former member of the Conservative Party, as I understand it. But I'm grateful to him for his party political advice. I don't agree with him, Mr. Speaker. I've come to this House to make amends, to explain what happened on May the 20th, and to apologise. But, Mr. Speaker, I really think that, with all humility, I must ask him to wait for the result of the inquiry, where he will have abundant opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to question me again and to make his party political points again. But until then, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ignore his advice.
Jonathan Gillis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hundreds of respondents took part in the Stoke-on-Trent North Kidsgrove and Talk Bus Back Better survey, of which 80% said they would use the bus more if services were improved. the Conservative-led Stoke-on-Trent City Council has submitted a fantastic Bus Back Better bid for £90 million to improve our infrastructure and our services. So will the Prime Minister make our day in Stoke-on-Trent and announce that money's coming soon?
Prime Minister. I thank him for his fantastic championing of Stoke-on-Trent. I also thank him, Mr. Speaker, for volunteering to serve as a teacher again. During the pandemic, a wonderful thing to do, Mr. Speaker, and I will certainly look and see what we can do to satisfy his request for more buses in Stoke as fast as possible.
Final question, Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, can I join in the tributes to Jack Dromey, an outstanding trade unionist and member of this House? Mr. Speaker, after another shameful week for his government, this has been a shameful attempt to apologise to this House today. So can the Prime Minister explain why the only person to resign so far for this scandal is Allegra Stratton, a woman, while he, the man who sanctioned and attended at least one party in 10 Downing Street, still sits in his place? Mr. Speaker, advisers advise and ministers decide. So will the Prime Minister, for the good of the country, accept that the party is over and decide to resign?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank him for his question. And I respect the point that he's making, but I must say I disagree, and I would ask him I would ask him to wait and see what the inquiry says, and I'll be very happy to talk to him then.
I'm going to let people leave before we start the urgent question. I'm all right with you. Order. We're now about to start the urgent question. I call on Miriam Cates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Minister to provide an update on the government's vaccination strategy.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for her question. We have built 3 lines of defence to give us the best chance of living with COVID-19 and avoiding strict measures: vaccination, testing and treatments. Vaccination is the most important of those three, especially in light of the new Omicron variant. Recent data from UK HSA shows that unvaccinated people are between 3 and 8 times more likely to be hospitalised with COVID-19. So every jab counts, keeping people out of hospital and saving lives. Since Omicron began making its way around the world, our strategy has been to massively expand vaccination. We set the highly ambitious target of ensuring everyone eligible for a booster will be offered one by the end of December, and we met that target. 80% of eligible adults in England have now had the booster, including 87% of people over 50. It means that, per capita, we are the most boosted large nation on the planet. In addition, more than 1.4 million young people aged 12 to 15 have already had their first dose since the vaccine was rolled out to this age group in September, with thousands still getting jabbed every day. And as of the 10th of January, eligible children aged 12 to 15 are being offered a second dose in their schools. This vaccination effort is a vital part of ensuring the safe return of pupils to the classroom after Christmas, and the continuity of in-person education, which we know is so important for their development. As we have done throughout our vaccine programme, we listen to the advice of the JCVI, whose clinical expertise is second to none. And we've done so, our vaccination strategy has been highly successful, allowing us to live with fewer restrictions than at many other places around the world, and keeping our children in educational settings where they belong. Mr. Speaker, once again, I want to underline my thanks to everyone who has made our national vaccination programme possible, including the JCVI, the NHS, our Vaccines Task Force, the vaccinators and all volunteers across the country. I'm sure the whole House will join me in thanking them for everything they've achieved.
Miriam Keyes.
And I thank the Minister for her statement, and the UK's vaccine rollout has indeed been enormously effective. But in September, the JCVI did express concerns about a child vaccination programme because of uncertainty regarding the magnitude of potential harms. Following advice from the CMO, the government pushed ahead with the mass vaccination of healthy children on the basis that while the benefits to children's health were marginal, it may reduce transmission and keep kids in school. Around 50% of 12 to 15s have now been jabbed. So what assessment has been made of the effectiveness of the vaccination programme in keeping children in face-to-face education? Now that the Omicron variant is dominant and more evidence is available, the benefits and risks of vaccinating children may have changed. So what assessment has been made of the risk of hospitalisation of healthy children due to Omicron compared to Delta? Evidence is emerging that vaccination has minimal impact on Omicron transmission. So what reassessment has the government made of the potential future impact of child vaccinations on reducing transmission in schools? And given a recent CDC study showing that the risks of myocarditis in young people following vaccination may be greater than previously thought and compounded by multiple doses, will the government urgently review the potential harms of vaccinating children? This weekend, the NHS put out a press release encouraging more children to get jabbed, including the lines, "Young people can get their life-saving protection and vaccines will protect young people from Omicron." Where is the evidence for these claims? And does the Minister believe that this communication meets the commitment not to put pressure on children? And lastly, given the evidence on transmission, will the government push ahead with the compulsory vaccination of NHS staff? Will it insist on a booster dose for all staff every few months? And if not, where is the evidence that compulsory vaccination of staff will increase patient safety in the long term?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think that my honourable friend is quite right to raise some of her concerns. And I think we need to start from scratch, remembering that it's the MHRA, which is the highly thought of regulator, that has deemed that the vaccine is safe for this age group. And then as a result of that, the JCVI providing their recommendations, and also our chief medical officers across all 4 nations adding to that. And already the vaccine has been given to millions of 12 to 15-year-olds in a number of countries, including 8 million in the United States. And data from these countries shows that the vaccine has a good safety record. And I'm completely confident that the JCVI would not be making these recommendations if they've got any doubt at all. And that's why all eligible 12 to 15-year-olds are able to book their second jab, is that it's the best way to protect these young people and to make sure that they're kept in education, as we all know that having that face-to-face education is one of the most valuable things that we've all begun to accept. And we're doing whatever we can to keep them in that position. I think we must also recognise that myocarditis does occur as a result of COVID infection as well, and we need to get that balance right to make sure that we're doing whatever we can to protect the majority of young people, to make sure that they are kept in education in a timely manner. I think it's quite right that we continue to follow the scientific evidence, the clinical advice that we have done throughout this pandemic.
We now come to Shadow Minister Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start by thanking the Honourable Member for Penistone and Stocksbridge for securing this urgent question, to you, sir, for granting it, and to the Minister for her statement. Mr. Speaker, our incredible NHS have moved heaven and earth during the vaccine rollout and achieved an extraordinary amount in the face of profound challenges. As the Minister makes clear, it is only through vaccination that we can begin to contemplate building a world beyond COVID. I'd be grateful then if the Minister could explain what assessment she's made of the current vaccine take-up rates, which have dropped to the lowest levels since mid-October, and what plans she has to ramp this up again. Can the Minister also clarify what action the government will be taking to drive up vaccination rates among 12 to 17-year-olds following media reports of children having to wait until February and travel 50 miles to get an appointment for their first COVID-19 vaccination? Can the Minister also advise what steps she's taking to persuade those who have yet to have the vaccine to do so as soon as possible, and what action her department is taking to tackle the raft of misinformation on the vaccine which continues to circulate on social media and beyond, doing real damage to public health messages? I would also be grateful if she could give an assessment of the impact of the introduction of NHS COVID passes on vaccination rates. Mr. Speaker, over the course of the pandemic, immunocompromised, suppressed and clinically extremely vulnerable people have been badly let down. They are crying out for further clarity, and recent reports highlight the fact that over 300,000 housebound people are yet to receive their booster. Can she take this opportunity to provide the vital clarity that people need and set out the government's booster vaccination strategy for housebound CV and CEV people? And lastly, Mr. Speaker, can she outline what further steps are being taken to vaccinate the world? As the development of Omicron shows, delay with regards to global vaccination has stark public health consequences here at home, with reports of the UK discarding hundreds of thousands of vaccines over the last few months. Can she reassure the House that assisting with vaccinating the world remains a priority for her department and this government?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Gentleman for a measured approach to this, and I think we've seen throughout the pandemic that everybody working together gets us to where we need to be, which is making sure that people are safe. He asked a few questions about the current vaccine programme and the uptake rate. I mean, I'm delighted that just about 80% of people aged over 18 have now been boosted, which I think is a fantastic achievement, and over 90% of everybody of the population aged 12 or over have had their first dose, and 83% have taken the offer of the second dose. I would like to reiterate the offer of a first dose and the second dose is always there. If people haven't yet come forward for their first dose, it's not too late. They can go to a walk-in centre or to make an appointment over the National Booking Service or through their GP to get that all-important vaccine. With regards to 12 to 17-year-olds, the school-age immunisation service has started to roll out again this week, and people can take the out-of-school offer as well by booking through a national booking service and to the walk-in sites. I know you mentioned about a case where somebody had to travel 50 miles. We did look into that situation, and it wasn't quite right, and we've been in touch with that particular member of the public, and that situation has been resolved. With regards to housebound patients, now this is the responsibility of either the primary care network or the CCG, depending on the local scenario. And every housebound patient has been offered their booster vaccine now. But if they feel that it's not that the timing hasn't been quite right, then if any MP in this House has got a case, if they want to take it with their CCG, and if that doesn't get to a solution, then I'd be happy to take that up on their behalf. The Honourable Gentleman talks about the ambition not just to vaccinate the UK, but to make sure that globally people are protected. I'm delighted to announce that as of the end of the year, we donated 30 million doses, partly through COVAX and partly through bilateral agreements, which I think is a great achievement, and we have that commitment in place for 100 million by end of June this year.
Jeremy Hunt, Chair of the Select Committee.
This country has
one of the best vaccination programmes in the world, the very best in Europe. And we should remember that the foundations were put in place when, at the height of the first wave, the then Health Secretary bought 400 million doses of vaccine that we didn't even know if it was going to work or not. And that has meant that we are now emerging sooner and more broadly than nearly anywhere else. But that success was also because a lot of GPs in the NHS were diverted away from their normal work into the vaccination programme, and that came with costs in terms of other treatment that they are not able to deliver. So can I ask the Minister, when are we going to see a workforce plan that takes account of the new responsibilities for vaccination the NHS will have? When will the budget for Health Education England be agreed, because 2.5 months before the next financial year we still don't know it? And will the workforce plan have independent forecasts so that we can make sure we are training enough doctors and nurses for the future?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his question. I know that he's made it ambition to ensure we have the right workforce in place, as does the department. And he raised a really good point about the vaccines and how we continue to administer them, not just the COVID vaccine, but flu vaccines and other vaccines that we have throughout our lifetimes. I think we've learned an awful lot from the rolling out the COVID vaccine programme, and like he does, I want to commend the Vaccines Task Force for having the foresight to look beyond what some other countries did to make sure that we had the vaccines in place when we needed them. So I think we do need to have a look again of how we maximise what has been such goodwill with the vaccinators that have come forward, that some were not trained as vaccinators before. As I travel around some of the vaccine sites, I meet people from all backgrounds who have taken up the challenge to come forward and become vaccinators. And the other day I actually met a builder who's now a vaccinator and who's living every minute of it. But also to thank the volunteers who have come forward to make sure this programme has been so effective. I think it's bringing together what we've learned over this programme of the last year to make sure that we can roll out other programmes in an effective manner.
SNP spokesperson Stephen Bonner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Once again, Scotland has set an example for the UK, and I want to take this opportunity. To thank all those NHS and frontline key workers involved in the excellent vaccination rollout programme. We lead the way in first and second doses administered, and we rank second worldwide for the most successful booster rollout programme, with over 80% of our adult population given their third vaccine. The rest of the UK also has one of the highest vaccination records in the world, along with the most of Europe. Isn't it well past time to begin a serious campaign for vaccine sharing and vaccination of those who are so far left behind in our global community? Secondly, will the UK government, when the booster rollout does wind down, commit to shifting the momentum from domestic vaccination to vaccination sharing with the poorest countries? And while we welcome the 30 million doses that have been donated, it is a mere drop in the ocean of what is actually required. And lastly, will this Tory government finally show a shred of compassion for the plight of those around the world? Thank you.
Well done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Honourable Gentleman made a very good point about ensuring that rural communities have access to vaccines, and that's exactly what we've done through our programme. We've made sure that we've stood up different walk-in centres, different ways of people accessing vaccines, such as vaccine buses. We've stood up more community pharmacies to be able to deliver in more rural settings. And we've really, and it's rural settings, but it's also hard to reach groups as well. It's important that we look at every way we can, whether it's through community groups and local leadership, through different faith groups, and also whether it's rural or urban areas, to make sure that we put everything in place to make sure everybody's got access to the life-saving vaccine. And I'd just like to reiterate what I said to the Honourable Gentleman opposite, that to date we've donated 30 million doses to COVAX and bilaterally as well, and we'll continue to fulfil our commitment for 100 million jabs donated globally by end of June this year.
Shrek Garney.
Mr. Speaker. I wasn't expecting that. I congratulate my friend for securing this very important debate. Reflecting on what the Chair of the Health Committee just mentioned on workforce plan, I know that my constituency in Wilden and across East Sussex has a huge amount of concern about accessing healthcare treatment. Can the Minister explain to me if a risk assessment has been done, if unvaccinated staff, NHS staff, which could be up to 88,000, leave the NHS, how treatment is going to be made available and how my constituents can access day-to-day healthcare treatment?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think my honourable friend is making reference to the vaccine of condition of deployment. I would like to inform the House that already over 93% of the NHS workforce have had their first job, which I think is incredible. And if it is the will of this House, as of before Christmas, that we implement this policy, and I think there are conversations going on a peer-to-peer level to make sure that people have got the right information they need to take up that offer of that job, which doesn't just protect themselves, but protects their patients, which are some of the most vulnerable people in society.
Floor session then.
Speaker, I want to use this opportunity to pay tribute to the hard-working staff volunteers at St Thomas's Hospital, my constituency, who have helped many members in this House receive their booster jab, and to the many volunteers up and down Vauxhall as well. The Minister outlined that 90% of people have had their first dose and over 80% of people have had their first and second doses. With the emergence of Omicron, we've seen that unless everyone is vaccinated, we are not safe. We are not safe until everyone is safe. And one of the issues is that the fact that around the world there are still a number of places where people are not receiving that vaccination. Will the Minister outline what the government is doing to make sure that there's enough vaccine across the globe, making sure that vaccine is equitable to everyone?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd also like to pay tribute to the staff at St Thomas's Hospital. I visited their vaccination centre and I was really impressed with the way they got it set up, and they've got the paediatric side as well, and all the volunteers that were there to make sure that everybody felt very comfortable when they went forward. Some having thought about taking their first dose for quite some time and taking that first plunge. So I'd like to add my thanks to those staff. The Honourable Lady once again made a very good point about we're not safe until everybody's safe, and I'd once again like to reiterate our commitment to COVAX, and not just the donation of vaccines, but also financially as well. I think if we go back to just over a year ago, we had the first jab of the AstraZeneca vaccine in the world given to a gentleman in Oxfordshire. And as a result of our collaboration with Oxford University and AstraZeneca, those jabs now continue to be delivered at cost throughout the world, which I think is a really good outcome of the investment from the government.
Lee?
Given its success, I believe that we should place our faith now in the successful vaccination strategy and not in further controls. When I voted against Plan B before Christmas, I said that more and more regulation creates more and more hypocrisy. We've spent most of the Prime Minister's questions debating, despite what's going on in Russia and the cost of living, the fact that the Prime Minister wandered out of his house where he lives and works and had a drink with colleagues. The truth is that the government should learn a lesson from this. We've got to sweep away every last vestige of telling people how they live their lives. We've had enough of it, the British people have had enough of it, and these controls are actually making things worse. For instance, forcing staff to isolate and putting our NHS at risk. So please, let's free up the people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to reassure the honourable gentleman that we won't have the restrictions in place for any day longer than is necessary, and I think my honourable friend is aware that the current restrictions of Plan B will be reviewed on the 26th of January.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of us have constituents who are having treatments and operations cancelled, long-awaited operations, because the hospitals are full of the unvaccinated. Yeah. We have one of the most indulgent approaches in England to the unvaccinated. Why doesn't she follow the example of New Zealand, Australia and the rest of Europe and do much more to incentivise people to get vaccinated?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yeah, I'd like to reassure the honourable gentleman that we're doing whatever we can to make sure that people do get vaccinated. But I think some of the stats speak for themselves. That I think that people more likely, 8 times more likely to be hospitalised if they're unvaccinated, and more than 60% of those in ICU are also unvaccinated. But I think we're not a nation that forces people to do things unnecessarily. And the Behavioural Insights team across the government have been looking at different ways to get those who haven't come forward yet to get their jab, and there's pros and cons of looking at different ways of doing that at the moment. I think we've got the right approach, which is explaining why it's so important to come forward to get their jab.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend's question was about whether there was a reassessment of the strategy on the basis of what we know now about Omicron, which we didn't when the strategy was set out. So will she answer that, particularly in respect of the policy of sacking NHS staff who aren't vaccinated, given that we now know that it doesn't, the rationale disappears because it doesn't stop you from catching it and it doesn't stop you from infecting others?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my right honourable gentleman makes a very good point. But I think I would like to go back to the MHRA, and which is obviously globally recognised as one of the best regulators. It's advised that the benefits of vaccination still outweigh any risk in most individuals. And with regards to myocarditis, which I think the honourable gentleman was referring to as well, it's greater in those children that have been infected with COVID than it is in those who have been jabbed. Although I must stress, Mr. Speaker, that instances in both these circumstances are extremely rare, but the JCVI do continue to review all data on a continuous basis.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's clear that the government does need a new strategy for driving up vaccinations amongst the unvaccinated. And around the country, there are practical examples of things that are working, which the government could roll out nationally. So will the Minister commit to looking at ideas like vaccine tracing, the offer of an on-the-spot vaccination when somebody comes into contact with any part of the NHS, and the offer of free cabs for those who are struggling to get to a vaccination centre because of the cost or caring arrangements? These things are working already, and yet they're not being rolled out nationally. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to reassure the Honourable Lady that there's lots of different measures across the whole of the country being put in place for what works in different specific areas. For example, there's pop-up clinics in mosques, in temples. There's been all-female clinics, which once again helps different communities. There's been clinics in restaurants in certain parts of Bradford, and there's a wide range, because not, as the Honourable Lady has quite rightly indicated, there's not one solution for everybody. And I think the fact that we've already got over 90% people having their first dose is a huge success, but it's the last few are the ones that are hardest to reach, and that's why we are putting in different measures to make sure that we do the right thing for those individuals in those different places and look at what will work for individuals across the different communities.
Steve Becker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When what is at stake is the balance of health risk for children right across Wickham and every constituency in the whole country, isn't my honourable friend for Penistone and Stockbridge absolutely right to ask the Minister to task the JCVI and indeed the medical officers with a reassessment of new evidence? And since my honourable friend just stood at the dispatch box and said evidence is kept under continuous review, whatever, and she nods, why can't she please just come to the dispatch box and say she's going to ask the experts to revisit the new evidence to just check that the balance of health risk for children is still appropriate and she's satisfied with the responsibility which she bears for the decision that's been taken?
I thank my honourable friend for that, and he's quite right that we do bear responsibility, and I don't take these decisions lightly at all, and neither does my right honourable friend the Secretary of State, and that's why continually the JCVI and the CMO review not just the UK data but the national data as well for every age range, for every vaccine, and for every eventuality. And I know that the CMO will have heard his request today, and I'm sure he'll be completely focused on making sure that the JCVI do continue to monitor in the specific way that he's asking for.
I bet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, could I congratulate everyone in Sheffield, GPs, the hospitals, the City Council, who worked brilliantly together to deliver thousands of vaccines in the run-up to Christmas. I want to ask particularly about people with compromised immune systems. I declare my own interest in that. The third dose, followed by booster, is absolutely right, but there's a lot of confusion to begin with about whether it was the consultant or the GP who should be responsible for contacting people about this. I think this is just about being sorted out. But I've now had an email today from my constituent Jeanette, who's in this position, that says that everyone should have received a letter in this situation offering availability of new treatments. She got the letter, her husband didn't. Everyone should have got a PCR test, apparently, sent them in the post. She didn't get one. She was told to ring 119. When she rang, she couldn't actually find an option to complain she hadn't got a PCR test. So will the Minister have a look at how this availability of new treatments, how the PCR test being sent, who's responsible for it, and what happens when it doesn't get enacted properly?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Gentleman for raising this really important part of our strategy to make sure that we can react very quickly with those who have got certain conditions, and for them to have ready access to the antivirals, which is the third part of our strategy to combat coronavirus. And it is a matter of GPs and hospital consultants linking up to make sure that the right conditions are considered. So if she had I would advise her initially to contact her GP to make sure she fits the category. And if she's received a letter but no PCR test, then she should contact 119 Test and Trace. I'll go online to find out if there's been sort of a mismatch in the data, but she's received a letter saying she'll be receiving the PCR, so she can do one if she's actually got some symptoms, then we just need to make sure that she gets one delivered to her home.
Derek Thomas.
It's great news that the Minister reports that 93% of NHS staff have received the vaccine. That's fantastic. And I commend every effort that's made to encourage the NHS staff and all those involved in delivering care to receive the vaccine. But what will the government do if in a few weeks we find that there is still a critically high number of people in the NHS that have not had the vaccine, will actually face being sacked or moved in April? How will that be protecting the NHS?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, as the Honourable Gentleman said, that to date, over 93% of the NHS have had their first jab. And I just want to put out a plea. I mean, we've already got the vaccines a condition of deployment in the care sector, and we didn't see that cliff edge that so many people predicted. But I also want to take you back to my own personal circumstances. My father was in a care home for over 7 years, and his carers became his family. And we always do the best for our family, and we want to make sure that they're protected in the same way that we're protected. And that goes on to the NHS staff as well, and other CQC regulated organisations. And it's about patient safety. At the end of the day, that's what we're looking for. We want to make sure that every patient is kept safe.
Mr. Speaker, I must say I'm amazed at the complacency of the Minister in relation to the potential loss of staff as a result of the vaccine mandate. The care sector has lost 54,000 people who refuse to take the vaccine, with a result that hospital beds are blocked, care packages are not being given, and care homes are under pressure. Now, if the social care sector is an indication that you cannot force people to take the vaccine, and the Minister's own assessment is that there could be up to 88,000 staff who will resist taking the vaccine. In the past week, we have seen 40,000 people off in the NHS because of having to isolate and the chaos that has caused. How does she intend to deal with the chaos of 88,000 staff not being available because of the vaccine mandate?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I don't recognise the data that he's put forward, but I think what's also important that we've already invested £465 million in the recruitment and retention programme for care home staff. I think that's important to recognise that it is a very worthwhile career, and people, the carers I've met, are really dedicated and get a lot from it. I think once again I come back to the fact that it's important to keep the most vulnerable in our society safe, whether it's care home residents or patients that are acutely ill in hospital.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. My sources in the NHS tell me that last week they received either from the department or from NHS England effectively instructions on how to go about firing people from the NHS in April if they haven't been vaccinated. And this caused them quite considerable concern. Now, the government's own analysis, so this is prepared by her department, and it's not an analysis of what the position is now, it's the expectation of where we get to in April. So her own department, signed off by her, thinks that 73,000 NHS staff will be leaving and 38,000 domiciliary care workers. Now, my question is this. I want people to be vaccinated, but we know that the protection against infection wanes quite quickly from 10 weeks onwards, so that means you're not protecting others. I want to see people vaccinated. I think the best way, and the way that public health professionals think is the best way, is to persuade people, not threaten them with the sack. So can I urge her, even at this stage, before February the 3rd, when if people haven't had their first jab, they won't be able to get to April, can I urge her to come back to this House and reflect on whether threatening people with the sack if they don't get vaccinated is the right policy?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I completely agree with my right honourable friend that persuasion is the right way to go. And that's why, first of all, when for the care home staff, the uptake went up tremendously. And we also know that since we implemented this policy for the NHS, that the uptake in NHS staff has increased tremendously as well, which is really encouraging. But we want it to be a positive choice. We want it to be a choice for people to understand it's protecting themselves and it's protecting their families, but also protecting the patients and making sure that the patients they care for are safe. And those one-on-one conversations are ongoing to make sure people understand from the perspective of patient safety, it's the right choice to make.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With rates of infection high amongst teenagers, many have simply been unable to get double vaccinated, yet due to being infected in the period that they would have been eligible and having to wait 12 weeks to then get a jab. So unfortunately for families hoping to travel in half term, they cannot access a COVID recovery certificate through the NHS app or through 119, despite contracting COVID being the very reason that they are not double vaccinated. So families are currently facing the prospect of having to cancel travel plans this half term, which has an impact not only on our constituents but on the travel industry as well. So I know that the department is looking at a solution for this, but could the Minister give some clarity that this will be achieved before half term to give that confidence to make those travel plans?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Honourable Lady makes a very good point, and it's not the first time it's been raised with me. And we had this situation on the run up to Christmas as well, and we're obviously now on the run up to half term. I'm sure we'll get it on the run up to Easter. I'd like to reassure the Honourable Lady that measures are being looked at to see how we can resolve this situation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank my honourable friend for efforts to save us from vaccine-only passports, leaving the option for testing on the table. Given what we know about the impact of vaccination on transmission, and that with compulsory vaccination the government's central assumption is the loss of more than 100,000 healthcare workers, the Minister has set out that patient safety is paramount to her. Does she therefore share my concerns that we risk lulling healthcare workers and patients into a false sense of security? And is it not the case that daily healthcare worker testing is a much safer option to rely on for the protection of patients?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my honourable friend makes a very good point about daily testing, and that is being carried out in certain cohorts of the workforce. And the UK HSA continue to monitor what's the best way is to make sure that the workforce, whether it's in the NHS or in other parts of the industry, actually protects each other as they go about their work tasks.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having turned 60 yesterday, it's very difficult to believe, isn't it, Mr. Speaker? But you're not saying I'm misleading the House, obviously. But having turned 60 yesterday, I feel I ought to ask a question about the elderly. So there is an issue now because quite a lot of people who had their booster vaccines in the elderly group will have had them in September and October of last year. I had mine at the beginning of November. What's our policy going to be ongoing from now? Because, as the Honourable Member for the Forest of Dean pointed out earlier, the immunity that comes from the booster runs out somewhat after 10 weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to take this opportunity to wish you a happy birthday for yesterday. You don't look a year older than 59. Or just one day older. The Honourable Gentleman raised a very good point, and I think once again I'll come back to JCVI, who provides advice for ministers, and they've looked at this, and they did make the recommendation just towards the end of last week that they felt that a fourth dose or a second booster was not appropriate at this time, and it was important to focus on boosters and people coming forward for their first dose and their second dose. But I will reiterate that the JCVI do continue to keep this under constant review, and should that situation change, then they will provide that advice.
I'm going to hand over to my colleague, but I would say, don't forget, we've still got some nurses here that could be doing injections on a pop-up in the House of Commons to help the Minister. Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And Mr. Speaker. First of all, I need to declare my interest both as a consultant paediatrician working in the NHS and also as a volunteer vaccinator. And I'm very proud to be part of the vaccination programme that has undoubtedly saved so very many lives. But in my question, I want to focus on children. I've worked in the hospital over the last few months and have been looking after children who have positive tests. But that's not unexpected because it's high in the population, and of course we test everybody. But I've not been looking after children who were admitted because of COVID. We heard in September that the decision on to offer children vaccine was finely balanced. Indeed, the JCVI referred it to the CMO, who finally decided on the basis of educational disruption to offer children vaccines. Given that the Omicron is less harmful than the variants they were considering at the time, has the Minister therefore asked the JCVI and the Chief Medical Officers to consider if these vaccines are still on balance better for children than not, except in the context perhaps of travel?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And first of all, I'd like to thank my honourable friend for her role in vaccinating probably thousands of people now. And everybody's really played their part to make sure that they use their skills or their time to make sure that the vaccination programme is being rolled out in such an amazing way. And I'd like to reassure the Honourable Lady, who obviously comes with an awful lot of expertise and knowledge, that the data is continually looked at by JCVI. I know we hear announcements from the JCVI and we think it's just something they've been looking at that particular day, but I would like to reassure the House that they continually look at data to make sure that we're moving forward in the right manner.
Adam Kaiser. Madam Deputy Speaker, as vaccination uptake increases, conspiracy theory-inspired groups have hardened their language, and threats against those involved in vaccination delivery has also increased. In some groups, and I'm not even going to name them because what they do is so despicable, but they're attempting to disrupt vaccination and even attacked testing facilities. The threat posed by conspiracy theorist anti-vaxxer groups is real and cannot be ignored. So can the Minister tell the House what assessment her department has made to counter these groups and safeguard the vaccine rollout?
Good question.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And misinformation, in my opinion, costs lives, and it's totally inappropriate, and there's no place for it in our society. And she also rightly highlights testing centres being attacked as well, which once again I'm sure is in the police investigation. But I think I'd like to reassure the Honourable Lady that we have got a unit that looks at this all the time, and numerous online presences taken down on a regular basis. And as you can imagine, there's various police investigations underway.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, when the facts change, we're entitled to change our minds. And since we passed the regulated activity regulations in December, we've had further evidence that suggests that the transmissibility of COVID declines after 10 or 12 weeks, as been referred to today. In the light of that, has the Minister gone back to challenge the JCVI on the advice it has previously given around whether or not we should be compulsorily vaccinating health workers, particularly given that it appears now that the risk that they pose to patients declines after a very short period of time, and especially given that we have an alternative, and that is very regular lateral flow testing, which will tell, more or less in real time, whether healthcare professionals pose a threat to their patients.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I think it's important to go back to some of the stats I said earlier, that those who are unvaccinated are 8 times more likely to be hospitalised, and more than 6% of people in ICU are unvaccinated. I think if we can stop people getting the virus in the first place, then it won't be transmitted, so people then won't be catch the disease and be hospitalised. But I think it's important that it was the will of the House in December that introduced that policy. But as I've said repeatedly, that JCVI keep all the data under constant review, which then obviously has an impact on government policy.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish to follow the honourable gentleman in the question that he put, because the reality is the facts have changed, and the depleting efficacy is presenting a challenge for government and their longer term management of COVID and the transmissibility as well. And therefore, rather than forcing NHS staff by the 3rd of February to have their first vaccine, which will present a massive risk to the NHS, and the government's own assessment, between 64 and 115,000 NHS staff and healthcare staff will be sacked. Will the government go back and review and ask the question of the JCVI as to what the best strategy is for managing this pandemic from this point forward?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I think we've got a strategy, we've got our plans in place, we've got our vaccination programme, our testing and our antivirals. And part of the vaccination programme is to make sure that, or the purpose is to make sure that some of the most vulnerable in our society are protected. And as I said earlier, the vaccines of conditional deployment are about patient safety and making sure that people who are in hospital or in care homes are protected from this deadly virus.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've been a big advocate of the vaccination programme and got my jabs as soon as I was enabled to have them. But could my honourable friend answer one of the key issues that of concern is that the gap between the different vaccines has been adjusted in terms of time at various times. And as the right honourable member for the Rhondda mentioned, those that are extremely clinically vulnerable have had their booster a long time ago. The effectiveness of that is waning. And we already know that in Israel, they are administering a 4th dose, particularly to the extremely clinically vulnerable. So will she take back to the JCVI to look at specifically the extremely clinically vulnerable to see if they need a 4th dose?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And those that are clinically extremely vulnerable or immunosuppressed have already had the offer of a booster, so they've already had 4 doses. And as I said earlier, just at the end of last week, the JCVI determined that at this stage it wasn't appropriate for others to have a booster or a 4th dose.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for her answers as well? And can I ask this question? In Northern Ireland, the Titanic Exhibition Centre, which is the largest mass vaccination centre in the whole of Northern Ireland, is to close on Sunday the 16th of January. Has the Minister come to an assessment within her department on the impact that the closure of mass vaccination centres across the whole of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland will have on the booster process? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as I understand it, that where the vaccination sites are in the devolved nations is the responsibility of the devolved nations. So I can really speak for England from that point of view, but you could perhaps take it up with the Health Minister for Northern Ireland.
Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I take this opportunity to put on record my thanks to my daughter and to all her colleagues across the NHS who have worked on the front line throughout this pandemic, caring for those who've sadly needed hospital treatment. I have been very supportive of the government's approach to the pandemic and its actions. However, I do tend to agree that as facts change, we should change our approach. From what we have learnt about Omicron is that the rationale behind mandatory vaccination has now shifted from protecting others to actually protecting oneself. Should we not revisit this based upon the figures that she has been quoting about vaccination status of those in hospital and ICU?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When we protect ourselves by having the vaccine, we are protecting others. And the Honourable Gentleman talked about Omicron, but we've had other variants before, and we'll have other variants, no doubt, in the future. So it's not just about Omicron, it's about what comes in the future as well.
Anira Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Before Christmas, the JCVI issued welcome guidance that 5 to 11-year-olds who are either clinically vulnerable or living with someone who is immunosuppressed should be vaccinated against coronavirus. Since then, we have heard very, very little. So could the Minister confirm when the rollout to 5 to 11-year-olds will start, whether it will be done through schools or vaccination centres, and really importantly, for those who are living with someone who is immunocompromised, how they will be identified, because their GP records won't show this, and I declare a personal interest, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the Honourable Lady, by asking her question, that it shows that it's quite a complex matter, and NHS England is actually looking into it to work out the best way to roll out the vaccine to this particular vulnerable group of the 5 to 11-year-olds.
Neil Hanby.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've often paid tribute in this place to the leadership on vaccines of Dame Kate Bingham, and speaking on the cancellation of the Valneva contract in Livingston in Scotland, Dame Kate said that this decision was short-sighted, problematic and inexplicable. It sets aside the future resilience and capability through the flexible state-of-the-art technology that Valneva offers. It will also help us tackle vaccine hesitancy and our international responsibilities through the lack of cold chain problems. So will the government listen to this sage advice from Dame Kate and reinstate the Valneva contract urgently?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to pay tribute to the work that Kate Bingham did as well. And without her leadership, we would be in a worse position with regards to vaccines. I know the Honourable Gentleman has raised the issue of Valneva in the past, and I think, as I said in the past, I can't comment on commercial decisions.
Mills.
Thank you. Can I join the Minister in thanking all those that rushed out the booster programme in December? Would she agree that there has been confusion for some of our constituents? There have been two booking systems, one for the GP centres and one for the national booking centres. Would she commit, by the time we get round to the autumn boosters, whatever we're going to have, to try and just have one booking system so we can see full capacity in all the local sites that patients can use in one place?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And my honourable friend makes a very good point. I think it's, what we've achieved in the last year is incredible. And obviously we know that we can improve things, and like the booking service is one of those areas that I'm sure we'll be looking at. So the honourable gentleman makes the point that sometimes people weren't aware that slots would be available through their GP and thought they had to go through the National Booking Service. So it's lessons learnt. We've achieved an awful lot in just over a year, and I'm sure we'll be looking into that as a matter of urgency.
Henry Smith.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate the United Kingdom government on one of the most successful and leading COVID-19 vaccination programs anywhere in the world. As we go forward, can I seek assurances that those who are immunocompromised and immunosuppressed, such as blood cancer patients, will have a real focus from the Department for Health?
I'd like to reassure my honourable friend that that will be the case. I've met with a number of the charities concerned in this area, and I'll continue to have meetings with those who actually represent the patients to hear their views.
Danny Kruger.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. The House was asked before Christmas to vote for the mandatory vaccination of health workers on the basis of the argument that it would stop transmission. We now know this is almost certainly not the case. So I think we're almost at the end of this session. It would be tremendous to hear a commitment from the Minister that she will formally request the JCVI to review the evidence behind this policy, because the only argument that she is giving for it is that it will help protect health workers themselves. That has got to be a decision that they take for themselves. And rather than sacking compulsorily what may be over 100,000 health and social care workers, surely before the deadline is upon us, we should reconsider this policy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it is quite clear that the vaccine does reduce transmission, and it is a matter of protecting an individual, but also when we're in these settings where there's some very vulnerable people who can ill afford to get more seriously ill. It's only right that we look at every aspect of this. And I think it's not just about the Omicron variant, it's about other variants in the future.
Laura, final question.
We've already heard from my colleague from South West Wiltshire and others, the expression attributed to John Maynard Keynes, but actually by Paul Samuelson: when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do? Decisions about recommending vaccinations from 12 to 15-year-olds were regarded as very, very finely balanced in any case, with Delta as the predominant variant. Now we've got Omicron, that so-called fine balance, with all the complications of children's benefit versus societal benefit, and because of the small but real risk of myocarditis, has clearly altered. So will my honourable friend ensure that she reflects upon that very wise quotation in this instance?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'll refer back to the fact that the MHRA confirmed that the Pfizer vaccine is safe and effective in 12 to 17-year-olds. And that followed a rigorous review of the safety, quality and effectiveness of the vaccines in this age group. And obviously the JCV then made that recommendation, and the CMOs backed that up. And I think it's based on those experts that this decision was made.
I thank the Minister for the urgent question. Urgent question, Clive Lewis.
Speaker, to ask the Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs to make a statement on the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Afghanistan is facing a serious and worsening humanitarian crisis. It's affecting well over half the population, with 23 million people facing acute food insecurity. This is now the world's most severe food security crisis. The UN has this week requested nearly $4.5 billion for 2022, the largest humanitarian appeal on record, reflecting the magnitude of the humanitarian challenge ahead. The UK has been at the forefront of efforts to address the situation, working with the UN Security Council, the G20 and G7, and with countries in the region. The Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary and other ministers have all been working extensively with world leaders. In August, the Prime Minister announced that the UK would double its assistance for Afghanistan to £286 million this financial year, and we've now disbursed over £145 million. That will support over 3.4 million people in Afghanistan and the region, providing emergency food, health, shelter, water and protection. We're working at pace to allocate the remaining funding in response to the developing crisis and the new UN appeal. Further details were in a ministerial statement on the 15th of December. Can I thank the British people for donating £28 million to the Disasters Emergency Committee appeal in December, of which £10 million was doubled by UK aid match funding. That's helped to provide life-saving support. We're particularly concerned by the impact on the situation on women, girls and other marginalised groups. Last month, I, alongside the Minister of State for South Asia, met with organisations representing women, LGBT+ and religious minorities to discuss support for their needs. In allocating UK aid, we want to ensure that women, girls and other marginalised groups have equal, safe and dignified access to assistance and services. We've pressed the Taliban to respect humanitarian principles. Our partners report that aid is getting through. We continue to monitor the situation very carefully, especially in the winter months. Aid workers face challenges getting money into Afghanistan due to the banking system, and we're working closely with multilateral organisation banks and NGOs to address these challenges. And we welcome the decision by the World Bank Board in November to transfer £280 million to support the humanitarian response, but it is vital that the World Bank produces options to allocate the $1.2 billion which is remaining in the fund. And it is important that donors across the world step up to this challenge, including by responding to the UN's call for additional funding.
Clive Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Afghanistan, as has been heard, is facing an escalating and multifaceted humanitarian crisis. In response, the United Nations has launched its largest ever single country appeal. In part because the crisis in Afghanistan embodies a new breed of 21st century international crisis, where the hazards of war collides with the hazards of climate change and a global viral outbreak. This has created a nightmarish feedback loop that punishes some of the world's most vulnerable and destroys their country's ability to cope. So far, the UK's response has been woeful. It took 5 months for the Afghan Citizen Resettlement Scheme to be put into place, whilst our aid commitment to Afghanistan in 2021 was lower than what was delivered in 2019. Madam Deputy Speaker, a heavy dose of realpolitik is now needed to address the immediate crisis before us. So let me ask the Secretary of State for more detail on how the government will square the circle of dealing with the Taliban and playing its part in supporting Afghanistan and humanitarian aid. Let me also ask the Secretary of State what plans her department has to deal with the multifaceted nature of this crisis. The £4.4 billion that the UN has made an appeal for is only a stopgap. It won't stop escalation. Yeah. But if we don't meet this appeal, it will be £10 billion next year and a lot more suffering. After 2 decades of military intervention, costing at least £27.7 billion, the UK must now step up to the plate to meet the £4.4 billion requested. The UN cannot deliver at the scale and speed needed by working alone. So will Global Britain now show global leadership? Will the Secretary of State agree to help those in urgent need, including 1 million children who face starvation, by convening a conference, as former Prime Minister Gordon Brown is calling for, with the United States, the EU and other willing partners to agree new financing to fully cover our obligation for this appeal?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I said in my opening remarks, the situation is enormously serious. Indeed, it is now the world's most severe food security crisis. On the issues to do with supporting Afghan resettlement, of course, everybody in this chamber has had huge praise for all those who worked during Operation Pitting. It was incredibly challenging, but those on the ground, including the ambassador and his team from the Foreign Office, did amazing work. Since that evacuation, as the Home Office Minister made clear last week, the Minister for Afghan Resettlement, we've helped a further 1,500 people enter the UK, including female judges, human rights defenders, and LGBT Afghans. And at that stage, she announced, of course, the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme. Regarding more aid getting into the country, as I said in my opening remarks, it is incredibly important that the world steps up to this challenge and especially towards meeting that UN appeal. The Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary and other ministers, including the Minister for the region, are working really closely with world leaders, including the US, the EU and the UN. Indeed, my colleague, the Minister responsible, is in regular coordination with all key international agency leads at the UN, including the UNHCR, UNICEF, the World Food Programme and IRC. We will be making more announcements in response to the UN appeal in coming weeks. But I would also like to restate what I said at the beginning about the importance of the World Bank giving options to unlock the 1.2 billion that it is currently remaining in that fund.
Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome the comments made by my honourable friend about the cooperation with international organisations, and particularly the Nobel Prize-winning World Food Programme that has done so much important work, not just in the region, but actually around the world. Perhaps I can ask her what work she is doing, working with others in the region, countries like Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and of course, even Iran, to try and get support together for those who are in the most vulnerable position that we have seen in generations. Because this isn't just about the misery that we're seeing in Afghanistan, where some people are forced to even sell their children. This is about a humanitarian response from the most generous country, from the United Kingdom, to people who are in desperate need and who are going to be supported, I hope, not only to stay in their own homes and to have a future, but also to turn to opportunities that will build an economy and build a future that has been so cruelly torn away from them in recent months.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to thank the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee for the close interest he has in this subject and for him mentioning the plight of children. We are deeply concerned by the forced marriage practice in Afghanistan, particularly for children, and we are very aware of the risk that more women and young girls could be sold into marriage as the humanitarian situation worsens. He asked about what we're doing about international engagement, and since August, our international engagement has been focused on securing a coordinated humanitarian response, agreeing a coordinated approach to the Taliban-led regime, and as far as possible, preventing economic collapse. We've played an active role in seeking to build a shared new international approach since the Taliban takeover, working with the UN Security Council, G20, G7, and engagement with other countries in the region. For example, the Foreign Secretary recently travelled to India, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, where she discussed Afghanistan and the importance of international coordination. In October, Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon, who's the Minister of State for South Asia, the UN and Commonwealth, attended the annual Women, Peace and Security Open Debate at the UN Security Council, where he made clear that the rights of Afghan women need to be at front and centre. And the Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary and many other ministers discussed Afghanistan with world leaders in the margins of COP26. We all urged the need to address the acute humanitarian situation. We are continuing to work very closely with countries across the world and across the region.
Foreign Secretary David Lammy.
Madam Deputy Speaker, let me start by thanking my honourable friend, the member for Norwich South, for securing this hugely important, urgent question. As we stand here today, the situation in Afghanistan is more perilous than ever. Since the withdrawal of British and NATO forces in August, the country has entered a catastrophic freefall. It is by no means an exaggeration to say the country is hurtling towards a humanitarian cliff edge that places millions of Afghans, including millions of children, at risk of starvation. The facts are truly horrendous. Over 90% of the country's health clinics and hospitals are without the funds they need to stay open. Basic public services have been decimated, with teachers, doctors and nurses going unpaid. Madam Deputy Speaker, you could be mistaken when you listen to these facts to believe the situation in Afghanistan can get no worse, can be no more perilous than it currently is. But this is tragically misguided. With 97% of the Afghan population soon to be living below the poverty line, almost 23 million are currently teetering on the edge of starvation. A further deterioration will have dire consequences for the people of Afghanistan and will impact not just the region, but also the UK, with more desperate people seeking sanctuary outside of the country. We must ensure that our sanctioned regime and our understandable desire to place pressure on the Taliban regime does not become an impediment to supporting the very people we seek to help. Some form of engagement is necessary if we are to support the people of Afghanistan, whether we like it or not. After the chaos of withdrawal, after Brits and Afghans were left behind, after the slashing of aid to Afghanistan just last year, only to U-turn to restore it, after the damning whistleblower revelations, you can understand why there is a chronic lack of confidence in this House in the ministerial leadership of her department. So can I ask the Minister the following? Will the UK convene an urgent pledging conference urged by former Prime Minister Gordon Brown to try to pressure the international community to meet the enormous need? Will the dialogue, what dialogue, has there been with the Taliban by the UK and other allies, maybe via the UN, over the issue of humanitarian access? And has the Minister met with NGOs and civil society to discuss how the government can better support their efforts? Madam Deputy Speaker, the need could not be more urgent, nor could the situation be more grave. As a proud, outward-looking country, we cannot turn our backs on ordinary Afghanis now. It is our moral imperative that we act and act swiftly to help Afghanistan in its time of greatest need.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we are very concerned at the rapid economic contraction and the impact that this is having on the people of Afghanistan, especially as the cost of essential products is rising and people are struggling to withdraw funds. The World Bank is predicting a 30% fall in GDP. It is a very serious issue. And preventing humanitarian catastrophe in Afghanistan is in everyone's interest. This is why we have already dispersed over £145 million of humanitarian support. The details on where all that support has gone were put in the written ministerial statement in December. There is further money that has been pledged from the UK, and ministers will be making further announcements in response to the UN appeal in the coming weeks. I do believe that working with the UN through that appeal, it is absolutely critical at this time. It's the largest appeal they've ever launched. Our funding is going through the Afghanistan Humanitarian Fund, the World Food Programme, the International Committee of the Red Cross, Red Crescent and other UN organisations. All of these are very trusted partners. As regards to sanctions, we in the UK led the way on the sanctions carve-out to ensure that delivery of humanitarian aid to Afghanistan could continue. And at present, what we're hearing on the ground is that that aid is getting through, although, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is a particularly difficult time because we know winter is indeed coming.
Arnie. Can I please just raise a point first, that when young babies are sold into sexual and domestic slavery, we must not refer to it as marriage. And can I ask the Minister not to do so going forward? What a shameful legacy we leave behind in Afghanistan, with millions now on the brink of starvation. Can I ask the Minister what conversations she's had with Pakistan, who already, I think, take the most amount of Afghan refugees, and also ensure that we are working with people so we're not... we're creating an understanding of what it is to live in a liberal democracy, and we're not fueling radicalisation in any way. And secondly, the Minister knows the amount of work I've done with many colleagues across the House on trying to rescue Afghan women and girls, in particular the Afghan female MPs. I must say that the Afghan resettlement programme isn't working for the people I'm trying to help. But what assurances can she give that we will enable more women to survive who may be killed by the Taliban, so they can one day go back home and even help with the aid programme?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and she makes a very good point about children. She asked what we're doing with other countries in the region, including Pakistan. My colleague, the Minister for Southeast Asia, is in regular contact with other neighbouring countries, and £30 million was allocated towards other countries in the region to help them to respond to how the crisis has impacted on themselves. We are committed to ensuring at least half of the aid that we commit reaches women and girls. I met with NGOs and organisations who represented both women's and girls' organisations and LGBT organisations just before Christmas. Some of the feedback that they were giving from the ground was incredibly helpful. As my colleague, my honourable friend knows, the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme was announced by the Minister for Afghan Resettlement last week. For example, she mentioned in that statement that 3 cohorts of LGBT people have already come to the UK under that scheme. We'll continue to prioritise those women who are most at risk, but we also need to recognise that whilst we are doing a huge amount to help resettle people in this country, we need to also support those on the ground, which is why we are working with the world-leading organisations to focus always on those most vulnerable, including women and girls.
SNP spokesperson Chris Law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. You know, even before the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, it was known that the people of Afghanistan faced a humanitarian crisis this winter. In September, the UN estimated only 5% of Afghans had enough food to eat each day. So therefore, this UK government cannot say that this famine has caught them by surprise. Yet with 1 million children at risk from severe malnourishment and 23 million people threatened with starvation, less than 25% of UK aid money pledged to Afghanistan in 2021 has been disbursed by the beginning of December. It's shocking. Madam Deputy Speaker, with the UN launching an appeal for nearly £5 billion in aid for Afghanistan, will the UK government ensure that all funds that were pledged finally reach those in need urgently? Can the Minister confirm what new money the UK will donate above and beyond the previous announcements? And will this UK government finally recognise that their ideological cuts to aid not only cost lives in Afghanistan but countless lives across the world, and reverse that decision?
Madam Deputy Speaker, just to correct the record, because I think it's important that we are talking about accurate statements here. Between April and December 2021, we disbursed over £145 million worth of aid. £135 million of that went into life-saving humanitarian support inside Afghanistan, including for food, health, nutrition, shelter, water, sanitation, and mine action, and another £10 million into neighbouring countries to support new and existing refugees. We're working quickly to develop plans to allocate the remainder of the other 286 to ensure it reaches the people who need it most. We will be making further announcements in due course. We made a written ministerial statement just before Christmas, and we are working with the NGO partners, including, as I said, the Afghanistan Humanitarian Fund, the World Food Programme, and the International Committee of the Red Cross and Red Crescent and other UN organisations. Those are the partners on the ground who are getting the aid that's needed. But the really important thing is that the world needs to step up to this challenge. It is the biggest challenge, and that is why the UN has launched this appeal today.
Order, I do want to try to get everybody in, but it is therefore important that the questions are short and to the point, not a list of several questions, but one question to the Minister, so the Minister is able to reply accordingly. Mark Logan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In my new role as Chair of the APPG on Afghanistan, I look forward to co-hosting with the APPG on Women, Peace and Security this afternoon, actually at 2:30 p.m. It's the Minister for Afghanistan Resettlement. My question is this, further to the opposite member's point around the appeal for $4.4 billion from the United Nations. Since the ending of Operation Pitting in August 2021, what commitments and indeed how much aid has this government already provided to Afghanistan?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Between April and December of last year, we disbursed over 145 million, including £135 million of life-saving humanitarian support inside the country and £10 million to neighbouring countries.
Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Taliban takeover caused an economic meltdown in Afghanistan. Banks ran short, millions lost work or went unpaid, and the currency nosedived. But perversely, markets still have food, but the problem is no access to cash. People are starving, babies are malnourished, women aren't allowed to work to feed their families, and there's no money to heat homes. My committee is clear. The government must urgently fund emergency organisations like the World Food Programme, and of the 286 million pledged, only 81 million has so far been disbursed. Can the Minister also update us on what steps are being taken to unfreeze assets and ensure financial transactions linked to humanitarian aid are excluded from international sanctions, specifically including paying local aid workers? And then can the Minister please monitor what the Taliban does with that?
Minister?
Madam Deputy Speaker, that's a number of different questions. Just to be clear, it's 135 million that has gone of our aid to the end of December. No funds are going directly to the Taliban. They're going through the other organisations and trusted partners that I mentioned. The Honourable Lady is absolutely right to mention the issues to do with getting money into Afghanistan and the banking system, and we're working really closely with multilateral organisations, banks and NGOs to address these challenges. But of the funding that is available to meet this crisis, it is really important that it is all unlocked, which is why I refer again to the importance of unlocking that $1.2 billion that's within the World Bank. You know, obviously we are a major shareholder of the World Bank. I spoke to our team at the World Bank just before Christmas. It's really important that we unlock that. So maybe she would like to work with her colleagues in other parliaments across the world to also share this passion, to encourage other members of the World Bank to really focus on looking at the options for unlocking that vital cash.
Eric Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I congratulate the member for Norwich South on securing this incredibly important urgent question. We have heard rightly from the Minister about the urgency of the humanitarian crisis, but there is also a learning crisis in Afghanistan, and all of the progress that had been made in getting children into education has gone back to the beginning. What can the Minister tell us about the government's efforts to make sure that teachers are getting paid to sustain education for the generations to come in Afghanistan?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as ever, my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise the issue of girls' education. We are absolutely committed to girls' education across the world, and we absolutely believe that all girls in education in Afghanistan have the right to education at all stages, both secondary and primary. We continue to provide emergency education funding through the UN system and multi fundings, including the Education Cannot Wait and the Global Partnership for Education. It is currently holiday time in Afghanistan. The schools are due to reopen in March. One of our key partners that we work with on providing education in Afghanistan is Save the Children, and I actually have a long-term scheduled meeting with the head of Save the Children immediately after giving this statement this afternoon, so I'm more than happy to speak to her immediately after that meeting.
Dan Jarvis.
Much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Taliban is a wicked regime responsible for murdering some of my friends. None of us wanted them in power, but Afghans have no choice. While humanitarian aid is desperately needed, it will never be enough. Millions are starving, the state has collapsed, and the economy is in freefall. So, further to the question just a moment ago by my honourable friend, the member for Rotherham, how does the Minister plan to unfreeze state assets, lift sanctions, and get the Afghan economy turning again?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I completely agree with his sentiment. None of us wanted to be in this situation. It is an absolutely dire situation. The impact on the people of Afghanistan, and especially those in vulnerable groups, women and children, is heartbreaking. But we will continue to focus on getting the aid and getting the international response. I think it's very important that the UN has launched that appeal today, and we will continue to work with them at all sides. In terms of sanctions, we were very clear in our leadership in making sure that sanctions shouldn't end up blocking that humanitarian aid. And I know that my colleague, the Minister responsible, will continue to make sure that he is doing all he can with partners across the world and with British leadership to make sure that that aid gets through. That is the immediate issue this winter, as well as continuing to press the Taliban to make sure that they hold their promises, that girls can go back to school, and that marginal groups will be respected.
Flick Drummond.
And I'm looking forward to co-chairing the meeting on Afghanistan in about 15 minutes alongside my chair there. The tragedy of this is that Afghanistan produces much of its food and the markets are actually well stocked. However, it's the collapse of the Afghan economy which means that people are unable to afford food, particularly during the winter months before they can go out into the countryside to their farms. So my question is very similar to the previous two, which is what further can we do to help the Afghan economy recover?
Thank you. I mean, there are multiple causes of this crisis, and my honourable friend is absolutely right on this. And I know that she has travelled to this country in happier times. So we are working really closely with the World Bank and the UN to find solutions that will enable INGOs to access currency in Afghanistan, which is absolutely crucial. And we will be making further announcements in response to the UN appeal in coming weeks.
Leila Moran.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The situation is absolutely desperate and every penny counts, but also how those pennies are spent matters. Yesterday, I spoke to an NGO working out there on the ground, and they said that although, of course, they welcome any money that they get, the UK government's rigid, bureaucratic approach means that that money has been delayed, the timelines to spend it have shrunk, and so that money, frankly, isn't spent as effectively as possible. And they'd also noticed these inefficiencies have got much worse since their merger between the FCO and DFID, just as the Liberal Democrats and others warned at the time. What we need now in responding to this dreadful crisis is not just more money, but also flexibility and timeliness in how that money gets to our partners on the ground. Will the Minister commit to speaking to NGOs having these problems, and will the money be paid on time?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my colleague for the region, the Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon, is in regular contact with NGOs. We have already disbursed over £145 million. It is going into life-saving humanitarian support. It is going in with key partners. It is not going directly to the Taliban, which is important here. It is also really important that we help to unlock the funding that is currently sitting in the World Bank. And that is a key pot of money that needs to also have the flexibility to get to people on the ground. So she is right to raise the issue of the need to unlock bureaucracy, and I would point to that being a particular concern in that area. As regards to the other money, we are working very quickly on plans to reallocate the remainder of the 286 million, but we do want to make sure that it reaches the people who need it most, and we also are making sure that no funds are going directly to the Taliban.
Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. At the start of the withdrawal, I had 656 constituents with families trapped in Afghanistan. Very sadly, the vast majority are still trapped in Afghanistan and want to leave. So therefore, the Afghan resettlement scheme has come as a big disappointment to all of those families. What action is my honourable friend going to take to enable those families that want to leave Afghanistan, have helped and assisted both the UK and the USA in during the time when we were there, to actually leave and fulfil what they wanted to do, which is to live a proper and decent life?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme was of course announced by the Minister responsible just last week. Okay? And she pointed out that it is coming into place this year. We've announced aim to settle 5,000 people in the first year of the ACRS, and she also announced that in light of the emerging situation and the successive evacuation efforts, we will exceed that aim. It is particularly the first to be resettled included women's rights activists, journalists, prosecutors, as well as Afghan families of British nationals. So I would encourage him to continue to work with the Minister for Afghan Resettlement on any individual cases that he has. But I would also say that we need to, as this question points at, support those in the country. It's not going to be possible to resettle every single case.
Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sorry, this is terrible. And every single element of this was not only predictable but predicted repeatedly for 18 months and longer. Operation Pitting was a disaster. We didn't actually prioritise the right people, or we have no confidence that we know that we prioritise the right people. We've abandoned lots of people, just as the Honourable Member said. All of us have constituency connections with people who are stuck in Afghanistan, and the Minister has no means of enabling them to get to safety. We have abandoned them to their future where there isn't enough food, there isn't enough money to pay the bills, there's no electricity, most of the hospitals aren't working properly, and we have a complete disaster, and part of the blame for that lies at the government's door.
Madam Deputy Speaker, during Operation Pitting, we worked at great speed. Our armed forces on the ground at great speed and in great danger to evacuate around 15,000 people to the UK. That was the second largest number evacuated by any country, behind only the United States. We are supporting people in Afghanistan.
Karen Butt.
With a large Afghan community as well, I am hearing every day stories of relatives who are murdered, who are disappeared, who are hungry and who are suffering from medical emergencies. And that includes a constituent of mine whose husband and 2 children are trapped in Afghanistan. So it is simply not the case that the promised assistance for the relatives of British nationals in this country are getting the kind of assistance that we need. So please, can she take this back and make sure that the desperate pleas of us with our Afghan communities are being heard in government so that we can assist those people who may have a claim to come here?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I agree that this is a really, really serious and very, very difficult situation, especially for the people in Afghanistan, which is why we have been focusing on working with others on getting that humanitarian aid in. But since the end of Operation Pitting, the UK has supported nearly 1,300 people to leave Afghanistan, including 700 British nationals and eligible dependents. And we will continue to work to ensure those still in Afghanistan are able to depart the country safely if they're eligible. So I really would encourage her to continue to work with the Minister responsible for Afghan resettlement on individual cases.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the member for Norwich South for bringing forward this urgent question. Madam Deputy Speaker, children facing starvation in a manner that was, as my friend for the Ronda said, entirely predictable and predicted, deserve the attention of the most powerful people in the world. So can I ask the Minister a direct question that's already been asked by the member for Norwich South and the member for Tottenham, but not answered? Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown has asked our Foreign Secretary to bring together an Afghan rescue conference so that those powerful people can do something about this. Is the answer yes or is the answer no?
Madam Deputy Speaker, our Foreign Secretary, our Prime Minister, our Minister responsible, and all members of the UK government have been working with our international partners and showing international leadership on this issue. It is right that we work with the UN on this issue. They have today announced their appeal, the biggest appeal ever, and we will be making further announcements on that UN appeal and how we continue to work with the UN, which is the right organisation to be working with in the coming weeks.
Seema Malhotra.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Frankly, what we are hearing today just isn't good enough, and we know the situation is utterly dire in Afghanistan. Could I request that the Minister takes away what she has heard in the chamber today from all sides of this House and come back as soon as possible in the next few days to this House with a statement about how the UK is stepping up its leadership on the humanitarian crisis, and secondly, what it will do to expedite and to the evacuation and resettlement of at-risk Afghans who are our
relatives of our constituents also have 400 cases outstanding, to make sure that there is a strong message and a clear message about how they could be evacuated for their safety, where they are still at risk and where they are now falling prey to this worsening humanitarian situation.
Mr. Speaker, this is the most serious food crisis in the world. This is not the time for party politics. The UK has been leading the international efforts on this. The UN has just launched the world's biggest ever appeal. We have been working with UK leadership from the beginning on this incredibly difficult situation with our partners at the UN, with our partners at the World Bank. We are leading the pressing to unlock that money from the World Bank, which is key here. I would please encourage you to get behind this UN appeal and get behind the UK government's efforts to bring the world together to help the people of Afghanistan, because that is absolutely vital for the people of Afghanistan right now. As there is no one working harder to get on with the job to support people around the world than this. And speaking from a sedentary position of accusing us of not getting on with the job, I find really offensive to the people of Afghanistan. There was a written ministerial statement which updated the House just before Christmas. I have said from this dispatch box that the UK government will be coming back with further statements in response to the UN appeal in coming weeks. That is the right thing to be doing, but it is right that we are working with the UN and other international partners and key NGOs. And in terms of doing my job, as soon as I leave this chamber, I am going to be meeting with Save the Children, who are one of our key partners in that area, because I believe it's really important that we continue to work with our key partners.
Hannah.
Speaker, and thank you to the Minister. The unfolding crisis in Afghanistan is nightmarish in its scale and its complexity, and the SDLP entirely supports the pathway set out today for an international conference to intensify and galvanise global support. We have heard about the efforts on the ground, and we know that only a tiny proportion of those affected will be able and seeking to leave Afghanistan, but clearly the scheme is inadequate. I'm aware from responses to me that the Northern Ireland Executive are ready and willing to accept a large number of refugees. Can you advise what discussions have had with them? And in light of the comments from a number of members, can you ensure that there will be a pathway for referral to that scheme from MPs' offices?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will certainly get back to her about a pathway for referral to that scheme from MPs' offices. It is a lead from the Home Office rather than myself. I would say again, this is a really serious and worsening crisis. It is the largest humanitarian appeal that has ever been made on record with the UN, and we need to be working with our partners at the UN, at the World Bank, in unlocking that funding for the humanitarian crisis, and that is what the government is doing. We will be getting on with that job.
Blomfield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to say that the Minister's response to my colleague's question earlier was unfortunate, because I think there is real cross-party concern on this issue. And the Minister was right in her opening remarks to highlight the generosity of the British people, because they recognise our special responsibility to the Afghan people in the face of the unfolding catastrophe following our chaotic withdrawal. Now, she set out what the government is doing, but clearly it's not working. Can she tell the House now what further plans the government has to address the appalling situation in Afghanistan?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think I've been very clear. We're working with the UN and other international partners. We want to unlock the funding that's at the World Bank that will make a considerable difference. We need to continue to work with trusted partners to make sure that the funding that we and others have pledged gets on the ground to those who need it most. We're working to also work with NGOs and other banks on how, if it's possible, to tackle some of those issues that there are in the payment system, which is causing such complexity. We're working with our education partners, with other NGOs, and we will be making further announcements in response to the UN appeal in coming weeks.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When something isn't working, then you have to look again, and that's why an international conference is so needed, to bring greater leverage to this situation to achieve the outcomes that we all want to see. One group of people the Minister hasn't referred to, however, is the network of democratically elected members of parliament in Afghanistan who are now spread throughout the world. They know their communities like we know our communities. So will she open up a dialogue with the very people who know the whole communities across Afghanistan to ensure that they have a say over the future?
Madam Deputy Speaker, she makes a very good point about speaking to many of those who've represented Afghanistani people across the world. And
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the situation is enormously difficult, and being heckled at from a sedentary position is very hard. May I point that my colleague, the Minister for Asia, is in a great deal of contact with those who are experts on this issue. Over 15,000 people were brought to, or around 15,000 people were brought to the UK. Many of them still are in hotels, but many more have also moved on into homes. We have been the second largest resettlement scheme in the world, and it is really important that you continue to work with the Minister responsible for Afghan resettlement on any individual issues that any of your constituents may face.
Kate Green.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend was right to praise the Minister for acknowledging the generosity of the British public, but I need to warn her that the anger and disappointment that people in this country feel at the failures of the British government threatens to undermine everything that she has said to the House this afternoon. Faith and community groups in my constituency are anxious to go on supporting the humanitarian effort towards Afghanistan. Can she say what work the government is doing with faith and community leaders in this country to support their efforts and that of their members and communities?
I'd like to thank the honourable member for raising again the issue of the generosity of the British people, and they have been enormously generous, especially in that appeal just before Christmas. It was of course match funded, up to £10 million of additional funding from the UK government, and it is truly life-saving aid. I think she makes a very good point about outreach to faith and community leaders in the UK, and I will certainly raise that with my colleague Lord Ahmed on what more we could be doing to especially explain what we are doing in the country in this very, very difficult situation back to the people of the UK who have such generous hearts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituent came to see me a number of times, desperately worried and in tears and heartbroken and concerned about her sister, who was worked in the Special Forces with the UK and NATO forces. Her sister is at risk. For obvious reasons, I won't name her now, and I won't name her sister now to the Minister. I have raised this with the Ministry of Defence. They wrote back to me on the 18th of November. They said they were confirming her eligibility. My office have raised this with the Home Office as well. Please will the Minister look into this particular case. I'm very happy to send her all of the details straight after this statement, because I'm desperately worried that the situation is getting worse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is heart-wrenching because I know that we all have cases of families that have been separated and constituents who've come here from Afghanistan who are very concerned about the impact that it's having and the risk that their family members in Afghanistan may be at. I would point again to the fact that the Minister for Afghan Resettlement announced that new scheme just last week. and to make sure that she raises it with the minister responsible. If she wants to send it to me, I will forward it on to her. But it has got to go through that scheme because it will be one of the most generous in the world, 5,000 people this year, but it cannot be every single person.
The World Health Organization predicts that 1 million Afghan children under 5 will die of starvation this winter alone. Another 2.2 million will suffer acute malnutrition. The progress achieved by the people there over 20 years has irreversibly been wiped out as a result of this humanitarian disaster, and fear of misuse of donor funds and validating the Taliban remain valid. But given the urgency of this crisis, does the Minister agree that the country, the UK government, must do more? And if it is truly not a time for party politics, will she, as my colleagues have requested, say yes to an international conference of 68 nations, as Gordon Brown has suggested?
Madam Deputy Speaker, she's absolutely right to raise what the World Health Organization have been saying. This is the most severe crisis in the world, the most severe food crisis in the world. That is why the UN has launched their appeal, and it is right that when we're working and engaging with other countries that we are also engaging with that appeal. I cannot make further announcements today, but I have said ministers are expected to make further announcements in response to the UN appeal in coming weeks.
Question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for her answers? The United Nations revealed yesterday that it needed £5 billion in aid for Afghanistan to avert a humanitarian catastrophe. And after 40 years of constant suffering, and after viewing this morning, as everybody else has, the pictures and stories on TV and media today showing young children and women who are in pain and starving to death, it is absolutely terribly upsetting, and it's hard not to be upset by the pictures as you see them. How can the Minister ensure that the humanitarian aid gets to those who need it most and need it right now? Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you. I'd like to thank him for his question and constant interest. As I've said earlier in the statement, we absolutely want to make sure that the aid gets to those who need it. That's why our funding is being challenged through the Afghanistan Humanitarian Fund, the World Food Programme, and the International Committee of the Red Cross and Red Crescent and other UN organisations. They are the right organisations to be working with to make sure that aid is getting through. Aid is currently getting through, although the winter is obviously a concern.
I thank the Minister for that. Does this relate to the statement just made? Chris Law, point of order.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I raised the issue about the supply of funding for the Afghanistan crisis as being less than 25% by the end of November, beginning of December. Indeed, I'm just going back to the record myself, given by your fellow colleague, given by the Minister here's fellow Minister from Braintree and SEDO, who said it was 70 million, which is indeed less than 25%. I appreciate that may have been increased during the time of December, but we still fall 50% short of the funds allocated for 2021. So I wonder if the Madam Deputy Speaker could give myself advice, and indeed the Minister advice, how to put the record straight on this matter. Thank you.
Well, thank the honourable gentleman for the point of order, but as he knows, it's ministers who are responsible for their words in the chair and in the chamber, and not the chair. The government front bench and the minister will obviously have heard what he has just said, and I'm sure that the minister would seek to correct the record if any mistake has been made. Thank you. Point of order, Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituent, a survivor of child abuse, has worked with the National Crime Agency during recent prosecutions, but she's been waiting since July for a decision on a family permit application to the EU settlement scheme. I wrote to the Minister of Immigration on the 2nd of November about the case, but I haven't received a reply. I've raised the matter on multiple occasions with the UK VI directly, but again, replies haven't been forthcoming. My constituent was told a decision was made on the 20th of December, and UK VI have confirmed that with me, but she still hasn't been told what the outcome is, which has completely ruined Christmas and New Year for her and her children. I've been chasing repeatedly and I cannot get that decision, and it is torture for her, Madam Deputy Speaker. So can you provide guidance on what I can actually do, what mechanisms are available to me to actually get that decision so that this woman can have some peace in her life?
Well, I am grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving me notice of her point of order, and I'm obviously as disappointed as I'm sure she is to hear that her letter and representations have not received a response, and I would hope that a response would now be forthcoming speedily, especially as there are ministers and whips on the front bench who I'm sure will convey that back to the Home Office. In terms of how she might further pursue the matter, she may wish to discuss the issue with clerks at the table office who can offer advice. I also know that the Leader of the House at Business Questions, if issues of delays from ministers are raised, does agree to take them back to ministers, so that may be another route she might wish to pursue through business questions. Thank you. Point of order, Peter Kyle.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I have informed the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland of my intention to raise this point of order. Back in July last year, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland released a command paper relating to the troubles in Northern Ireland and the legacy issues relating to such. In his statement to the House back then, he said, and I quote, that he's introducing legislation by the end of autumn. That was volume 699 on the 14th of July for the benefit of Hansard, but no legislation came forward. At the last oral questions, just before Christmas, I asked him where the legislation was, and he replied, and again I quote, "We have not paused." That was volume 705 on the 8th of December. Now, this week, there has been a government briefing to Politics Home website about that legislation, and I quote from it. A government source told Politics Home that they needed more time to get it right, and that the legislation might not make it onto the statute books until late spring or early summer. Madam Deputy Speaker, this strikes me as a very clear breach of the Ministerial Code, which is very clear in its intent that ministers should talk about legislation and how legislation is going to be handled in this place by talking to this place, either in an oral statement or a written statement, preferably an oral one, so that we can cross-examine it here at the dispatch box. Can you confirm whether you have been informed, or Mr. Speaker has been informed, about any intentions over this legislation? If not, I think it is a discourtesy to the Speaker, I think it is a discourtesy to this House, and to all people in Northern Ireland for whom anxiety has been provoked by talk of this legislation. It is certainly a discourtesy to them.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving me notice of his point of order. He raises a number of issues. First of all, decisions about when to make written or oral statements are obviously for the government rather than the Speaker. However, as he will know, the Speaker has repeatedly made it clear that substantial policy announcements should be made first to this House, and I would expect that the government would observe that in relation to this very important issue. With regard to breaches of the Ministerial Code, that would be something that, if he wished to raise that, that would be with the Cabinet Office, obviously. I will ensure that the Speaker is aware of the point that he's made about possible changes to policy, but I would hope that the government front bench has heard that and will feed it back to the Northern Ireland Office. Thank you. Thank you. We now come to the 10-minute rule bill. Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require advertisers, broadcasters and publishers to display a logo in a case where an image of human body or body part has been digitally altered in its proportions and for connected purposes. Madam Deputy Speaker, to set the tone for this speech, I'd like to describe an advert put out about a year ago by Dove called Reverse Selfie. It starts with a young girl looking at her phone. On that phone, there's a picture of her. She may be in her late teens, early 20s. It starts to scroll backwards. She sees the comments underneath the photo suddenly disappearing, with all the likes slowly drifting away. Then the comments, "You look amazing," disappearing. Suddenly the filter changes, and so does her hair colour. The size of her face, including her nose, changes. Blemishes on her skin suddenly reappear. The process goes further. She puts the phone down, lies backwards, and there behind her is a picture of her family that reappears on the wall. She's scrubbed it off, and a picture of her favourite teen band. Furthermore, the image shows makeup, including lipstick, coming off. And finally, what's left in front of us is a girl no older than 13 or 14. The advert finishes with a line that's pertinent. The pressure of social media is hurting our girls' self-esteem. This is an all too common story happening up and down the UK to our daughters, our sons, our granddaughters and our grandsons. Now, the advert's only a minute long, but encapsulates perfectly the problem facing our media-hungry society. Don't believe me? 1 in 5 adults feel shame about their body. In teenagers, it's 1 in 3. The Women and Equalities Committee inquiry into body image found concerns about the way we look start younger, last longer, and affect more people than ever before, with 61% of adults and 66% of children feeling negative or very negative about their body image. NHS England data released over the summer showed there was 2,682 admissions of children under the age of 17 with a primary diagnosis of eating disorders between April 2020 and March 2021. That's an increase of 34% on the previous year. This issue is here, stark, and getting worse. And I've seen it in my own practice as a GP before being in this house. And I fear the numbers will only increase from the 1.25 million people who've suffered with eating disorders and the 1 million people using steroids in the UK, many in the pursuit of improving an image that's simply unattainable no matter what you do. The problem is palpable, prolific, and pervasive. Now, the growth of influencers, collaborations, and sponsored posts, particularly on social media, has added to the ever-growing list of tools advertisers have at their disposal, often featuring images that can be secretly edited. This, combined with the amount of time we spend endlessly scrolling through social media, has created a perfect storm for physical and mental health. Constantly seeing altered images warps our sense of reality and drives an aspiration that can never ever be achieved. Even the social media companies know this, as the Facebook leaks have shown. We're setting up a generation to fail, and it's hurting us all. It comes as no surprise that Women and Equalities Commission has reported on body image. The Advertising Standards Authority has opened an inquiry and a call for evidence on the issue, and the Health and Social Care Committee will, in the coming weeks, open their inquiry into body image. The UK is waking up to the issue, as have other countries across the world, with legislation in place across Israel, France, and currently being brought forward in Norway. Now, body image is an issue that's multifaceted, covers multiple government departments with no silver bullet. We all understand it requires a layered response from the likes of education to that of the online harms bill and the assessment of risk. And these are all rightfully being looked at. My bill is a simple stepping stone, a brick in the foundation to help tackle the problem. I'm proposing a new law in Parliament which calls for commercial images featuring digitally altered bodies to be labelled with a logo where the body proportions are artificially doctored. To put it simply, if someone's being paid to post a picture on social media, which they've edited, or advertisers, broadcasters or publishers are making money from an edited photograph, they should be honest and upfront about it. So this isn't about stopping you touching up your wedding photos or removing the red eye on a post. It's targeted at those with significant, far-reaching influence and those with commercial